This took place in November of 2005. Each year, my job would give us 10 vacation days. Seeing as I hadn't yet used any this year, I decided to take a week off to visit different states around the US. To get around, for the most part, I would actually hitchhike, which is something I've done multiple times in the past. Despite all the horrible recognition it gets nowadays, I actually really enjoy doing it. I've met a lot of people through hitchhiking that I still call friends to this day. Anyway, it was around 2:30 p.m. I was walking down the road giving the usual thumbs-up signal hitchhikers typically give. It had been a while since my last ride, and I'll be the first to admit I was getting a little desperate. Eventually, a red pickup truck pulled up next to me. Inside were two men. My best guess is they were in their 40 years old. One of them asked me where I was going, to which I responded. They both looked at each other for a second, then back at me, and signaled me to get in. They seemed normal enough, so I tossed my bag in the back, got in, and shut the door. But I quickly realized the whole floor of the vehicle was completely covered in different types of bullets. Before I had time to even rethink my decision, we were already going 60 down the highway. I tried to engage in some small talk to ease the tension, and it actually sort of worked. But somehow, the topic landed on how one of the guys had just gotten out of prison for aggravated assault. A disturbingly short amount of time later, they started asking me how much money I had. This is when I started to realize I could be in some serious danger. Now, I had been hitchhiking for a couple of days by that point. I didn't look the best, so I tried to play it off that I was homeless and had no money whatsoever. This response was met with complete silence. For the next 30 minutes or so, not a single word was said, though multiple times I would catch the driver looking up at me through the rearview mirror. I honestly just tried to ignore it, something I regret doing to this day. Fast forward 20 minutes, and to my horror, the driver turned off the highway and started down some unpopulated dirt road. I instantly shot up and said, dude, where are we going?" After 15 seconds of no response while the car was still driving, I grabbed my bag, unlocked the door, and dove out of the car. Instantly, I looked up to see the red pickup slam on its brakes, shortly after followed by the reverse lights turning on. I cannot explain to you how fast I got up and ran into a nearby cornfield. I ran for 5 minutes when I swear I could hear gunshots behind me. They were clearly distant, but still, I ran for another 5 minutes until I reached the sign for the main highway. I then called the police, explained the situation in my current location, and waited in the cornfield until an officer arrived. I was then driven to the nearest police station, where I filed a police report. Though in terms of descriptions, there wasn't really much I had to give other than two men inside a red pickup truck. I hadn't gotten the license plate number, and I didn't even really see the full faces of the guys or even remember them. The whole situation was no doubt the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I don't completely know what those guys had planned, but I truly believe I could have lost my life that day. While I still hitchhike occasionally, I am now far more cautious in the cars I get into. Each year when I was a kid, we would celebrate New Year's Eve and stay up late. Normally, I would go to bed at about 10 o'clock, but on New Year's Eve, I would stay up until around 2 a.m. My sister, my parents, and I would play board games and watch movies. We would then watch the ball drop when it was midnight and would stay up for several more hours. I think this happened when I was about 12 years old. That time, like any other, we played games and watched a couple of movies. This continued well past midnight, and at roughly 2 a.m., we all got tired and finally decided to go to bed. We could sleep in the next day because nobody had work or school. Our house was on a pretty quiet street. Other than that, it was a pretty typical neighborhood. I stayed up a little bit later than everybody else that night because I was watching a movie in the living room. When it ended, I finally went to bed. I remember getting back into my bedroom and turning out the lights. When I did, I could see very clearly into the front yard because of the moonlight. There was a woman standing in our yard. She was not facing me, and I didn't recognize her. I walked over to the window, and when I did, the woman turned and faced me. She saw me and then started to walk closer in my direction. This really creeped me out. Nobody was supposed to be in our front yard. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I moved away from the window and hid. I ducked down and laid on the floor so that she couldn't see me. My window was pretty large, and I did not have a cover on it at the time. Now, my bedroom was also on the second floor, so she couldn't directly reach me, but I was still terrified. I waited there, just hoping that she would go away. A few minutes went by, then I heard something hit my window. I wasn't sure as to what it was. I started watching my window, and something else hit it. The woman was throwing sticks at it. She was trying to get my attention, and I don't know why, but I got up. I carefully looked out of the window again. The woman was still there and looking right up at me, this time closer. She said something, but I couldn't hear her. Then I saw her motioning for me to let her inside. I was not going to do that. She then walked to the side of the yard near the front door. Then she knocked on the front door. I didn't move. I was hoping that my parents or sister would wake up. I didn't have the thought to call the police for some reason. It just never entered my mind. The woman knocked on the door on and off for like 5 minutes. Finally, she walked away. I watched her from the window walk to the end of the driveway and then a little ways down. She then got inside of a vehicle and drove off. The whole situation was really bizarre, and it really confused me. The next morning, I told my parents about it. They had no idea what she could have been doing either. Luckily though, she never came back. This past New Year's was my and my boyfriend's 4-year anniversary. We typically don't do much, so this year, we decided to make it special by planning a romantic getaway. At the time, the two of us were living in Seattle, and we wanted to rent a cabin in a snowy small town for the weekend. We found a cabin on Airbnb with a hot tub, and we were sold. The cabin was, of course, the last house on the road. To get to it, you had to drive down a small remote private road that ended in a roundabout. Off the roundabout was a long uphill driveway leading up to our cabin. We got to the cabin, and it was snowy and beautiful. The cabin itself sat on top of a garage, and you needed to take stairs on the back side of the property to get to the front door. When we got inside, there was a booklet with all the cabin's info outlined. The book said that during the snowy season, don't be surprised if their contracted snow plowers showed up to clear off the driveway. Okay, sounds good. So we unpacked and realized that there was no service on either of our phones, but the booklet told us that there was a landline in the cabin if we needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire, playing board games and drinking wine. The weekend was exactly what we needed. We planned to spend the next day in town, and that night I had booked us a reservation for a nice dinner. We were gone almost all day, only returning briefly to get dressed up to enjoy some good food. Dinner was great, and we were excited to head back to the cabin for some champagne and hot tubbing. While at dinner, the temperature had dropped, and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of powder. We drove down the private road and got to the driveway. At that point, my boyfriend stopped the car, headlights shining in front, and asked if I noticed the new tire tracks. I looked at the driveway, hoping to quickly disregard the new tire tracks, but there they were. Immediately, we remembered that the snow plowers could have stopped by, but the issue was we saw the tire tracks because of the snow, and who plows in the dark. We also knew that once we were at the cabin, we had no service on our cell phones. So we figured we would head back into town and message our Airbnb host and ask if they or any of their friends had stopped by. We waited for a while in town for a reply from our host, but we didn't hear back. We could have called, but at that point, it was past 10, and we didn't want to be bad guests. We figured we blew the whole thing out of proportion and might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I am big into true crime and spooky subreddits and horror movies, so I was probably just psyching myself out. My boyfriend drove us back. This time, we actually drove up the driveway towards the top of the hill. Part of the driveway, though, I noticed something. My stomach dropped as I noticed footprints on the property. We backed down the driveway and took a closer look to see if there were any more footprints. From what it looked like, someone had driven up the driveway, then reversed down, parked, and then got out of the car and walked all around the property. The property was quite large, with tons of trees and brush, and we knew that these footprints could go anywhere. The moment we saw the footprints, we decided to call the police. We figured it was better safe than sorry, and we would just have the officer go onto the property with us to check everything out. We drove down the road till we got service, called the police, and waited for their arrival. The policeman showed up, and we followed him onto the property. The officer scanned the property and determined there was no one out there. Obviously, we were a little bit shaken up and very embarrassed. We thanked the officer as he left. Needless to say, neither of us wanted to sit in the hot tub in the dark woods after what had happened. Instead, we locked the doors and watched a movie with champagne. We were both tired from the day and passed out pretty quickly. At 2 a.m., we both woke up on the couch with the TV on and all the lights laughing about how the night didn't turn out as planned. As my boyfriend went to brush his teeth, we heard a noise. It sounded mechanical and only lasted a few seconds. We looked at each other and froze. The garage door. There are very few reasons that someone would need to open the garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 2 o'clock in the morning. Like I said, we woke up with all of the lights on, and the cabin had lots of windows. We knew that if someone was outside, they knew that we were here and that they could see us. I immediately grabbed the landline and dialed 911. Once again, we sat crouched in the Airbnb, praying for the police to arrive. We knew that whoever had made those tracks was still on the property, and this time they were making noise. As I sat talking to the operator, we heard a bang on our balcony as if someone was throwing something up onto it. I was losing my absolute mind when the operator told me the police were nearby. All of a sudden, they were there. We saw the police lights and watched them search everything. Then, soon, we heard banging on the door. It was the police, and we were okay now. At the door were two policemen, one in front of us and one a little behind, kind of kicking around the snow and looking at the ground. I immediately noticed the police officer in the back as the officer who did the initial check on the property. The officer told us that not only was the garage door shut, but it was locked, and again, there were no signs of someone on the property. We discussed leaving, but the officer said the road conditions were too dangerous at that time of night. I looked at the officer who had to come out to the property twice, and I felt I had deeply disappointed him. My boyfriend and I went back inside, locking all the doors again, and we tried to sleep. The next day, we were leaving. While we survived the night, I didn't feel right in the cabin anymore. It was forever the spooky cabin in my head, and I just wanted to leave. As we packed, we heard the same noise that we heard at 2 a.m. That's when I had the realization that it was the heater all that time. It was just the heater in the garage making this noise. My boyfriend looked at me and immediately said, "You need to give up your murder shows," and then walked away. As for the banging on the balcony, it was just a perfectly timed fall of a pine cone. I promise I'm not paranoid. I think back on this story a lot and I'm embarrassed about how little came of it, but also incredibly grateful for the same reason. Let me give you some context before the story begins. When I was 18 years old, I lived a pretty normal life. I had just finished high school the year before the story takes place. I had always been one for horror, anything, whether it was movies, games, jump scares, you name it, and I loved it. I never seemed to be afraid of anything, and I loved that it allowed me to go and do things that made me appear tougher to girls who I was interested in at the time or who were interested in me. I thought of it almost like a superpower. My friend had always talked about this REM-induced real-life nightmare called sleep paralysis. I, however, had never experienced such a thing. My friend Ellie suffered from extreme lucid dreaming. She explained to me several times about how certain stimulators or outside factors could play into her dreams and mold them into what could potentially be a heavenly experience full of fun and wonder, or could just as easily turn into a bone-chilling nightmare straight out of hell. Being the light sleeper I am, I saw no chance of it occurring, so I kind of just let it go right over my head. One night, Ellie texted me and asked me to come over as she had just suffered another so-called evil experience due to her sleep condition. When I arrived, I found her asleep again, seemingly peacefully. I took a seat on her stool that she had for her makeup dresser right by the window and started playing a game on my phone. 30 minutes or so went by, and I figured she was peacefully asleep and it would probably be okay for me to leave as long as I let her know that I stopped by as she requested. But suddenly, Ellie awoke and started screaming. This was a different kind of scream, though, a type of scream I had never heard before, especially from her. It was almost mumbled, I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes bulged open, and I ran over to her side. I asked her if she was having a bad dream. She started shaking. I grabbed a hold of her to try to calm her down, but the tremors grew. I asked her what was going on, but no response. I figured this was just another one of her so-called sleep paralysis episodes. I did my best to comfort her. After about 40 or so seconds went by, she regained full control of her body. I made sure she was okay and then left to go back to my house, as it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning. Right as I got home, I received a very panicked text reading, "The hallucinations won't stop." I asked her to clarify what she meant, but no response. After about 20 minutes went by, I took it upon myself to head back over to her place. When I arrived, I noticed the illumination of red and blue covering her front porch and the surrounding road signs. I ran up to her house, desperately trying to find out what happened. As I approached the house, I noticed Ellie was speaking with one of the officers on the scene. When I went up to talk to her, Ellie and the officer walked me over to a more secluded area. What I found out still sends chills up my spine to this day. Apparently, when I had gone over to Ellie's that night, she wasn't asleep at all, she was pretending to be. Evidently, right behind me was a tall, skinny homeless man hiding in her closet. The police had also found a very large kitchen knife on him as well. The theory to this day is Ellie thought she was having an episode when, in reality, this very real man was quietly creeping towards her in her bedroom. Supposedly, when I had entered her house, it was enough to spook the man into hiding, and my presence was enough to keep him hidden. This gave Ellie the time to call 911 and report the situation, which in turn resulted in the police arriving almost immediately after I had left. Thankfully, the man was taken into custody rather quickly. To this day, I don't know what to think about that night, other than that I could have very easily saved her life simply by keeping her company during what I thought was a very stressful situation. This, in turn, could have resulted in some very scary and heinous acts that would have taken place if I had been there any later. I hope I never experience such a thing. That would be what finally trips my fear factor without a doubt. I work overnight at a warehouse a few miles out from my home. My schedule varies depending on the day, but I'm usually home between 4 and 6 in the morning. I was driving home from my exhausting shift, and all I could think about was getting in bed and passing out. I wasn't falling asleep behind the wheel, but I definitely wasn't fully awake either. I parked on the street in front of my house, walked in through the front door, then walked upstairs and fell into bed. It was one of those days where it just felt so good to be laying down. I was asleep in minutes. When I woke up, I was just as tired, if not more so. I wasn't even sure why I'd woken up in the first place. I rolled over and looked out the window, and it was still dark out, so it had to have been less than an hour since I got in bed. As I began to roll back over to sleep again, I noticed something that made me stop. My bedroom door was open. I stared at it for a good couple of seconds, just so confused by it. I never sleep with my door open. It always makes me feel uncomfortable. Coming home that day was a blur, though, so I couldn't actually remember closing the door, but it was just one of those things I knew I'd always do no matter what. I got up slowly and walked across the room. All the lights were off in the house, but I looked down the hallway outside my room as I closed the door. The second the door clicked, a sound came from the other side of the house. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like something moving for just a couple of seconds, then it stopped. My whole body froze, and I stood there for a minute listening for anything else. The silence was deafening now and only freaked me out more. I took a deep breath and opened the door again. In my head, I still didn't believe this was anything real. I was sure this was just me being scared over nothing, but I still wanted to check just to keep me from overthinking it. I walked across the hallway to the second bedroom, which was where I thought the sound had come from. The room only had a dresser and a bed in it, so there wasn't much to look around. I didn't see anything, so I started walking back until I heard a door in the hallway creaking open. I leaned over and saw a man stepping out of the closet between me and my bedroom. He was looking at me, and in that moment that we made eye contact, I recognized him. I quickly closed and locked the door to the room I was in, and I heard him run down the stairs and out of the house. Of course, I called 911 as soon as I was safe to go back to my room. The police said there were no signs of forced entry, so they said I must have left the front door unlocked. Again, I know I was tired, but that's just something I always do unconsciously, so I don't know if I can believe it. What scares me is that I know I had seen that man from somewhere before, but I have no idea where or when. It could have just been at the grocery store or walking through the city, but it all seems too coincidental. Also, I don't know how long he was inside my house for, but nothing was taken. I know he was likely the one to open my bedroom door while I was sleeping, though, which makes me really uneasy to even think about. He could have done anything or taken anything, but he didn't. Maybe when he opened my bedroom door, he recognized me too and decided not to do what he planned once he saw it was my house. This happened years ago when I was 20. Back then, I was good friends with a guy named Ethan, who I met in high school. Both of us grew up with a passion for the outdoors, and so we thought it'd be fun to go on a week-long backpacking trip in the California woods together. We've done this once before, and I really enjoyed it. I remember looking forward to it. The whole trip started off going well, but that only lasted till the second night. It was just starting to get dark, and Ethan and I were setting up our tents for the night when we began to hear the distant sound of leaves crunching under multiple pairs of footsteps. We were pretty deep in the forest, but running into other campers wasn't completely unheard of, just, I guess, a bit of a rare occurrence. Eventually, 3 guys came into view. They didn't really look like campers. They didn't have backpacks or anything. I thought it was kind of weird to be wandering around the forest this late, but I didn't think much of it. They gave us a somewhat friendly greeting, and we gave one back. They then asked us if we were camping for the night, which was obvious as we were in the process of setting up our tents with the rest of our stuff all laid out. We pointedly said yes and asked if that was a problem. We wanted to make sure we weren't on someone's private property or, just generally in a place we weren't supposed to be. They replied saying no and just kind of walked off. The whole encounter was odd, but Ethan didn't think so. He pointed out how they were most likely just hunters in the area, as all of them were armed, something I myself didn't notice. Got to a few hours later, and Ethan and I were now asleep in our respective tents. This was around the time I woke up to the sound of yelling, like multiple voices shouting in the distance. I yelled out to Ethan to see if he was awake. He was and was just as confused as I was. It was 2 a.m. when this happened. Our conversation was then interrupted by multiple gunshots. They honestly sounded like they were getting closer. I asked Ethan if he thought that whoever these people were just hunting. He responded, saying, "No, dude, there's no way they're hunting this late. I think we should go." My heart started to race, now realizing the reality of the situation we were in. We both unzipped our tents, grabbed only our bare necessities, and started hastily moving west. We moved for maybe half an hour before stopping. The yelling and gunshots were now barely audible, although they were persistent, continuing off and on up until sunrise. All night, we basically just sat there, listening to them, both wide awake from a mixture of fear and adrenaline. When the sun finally rose, we discussed what to do next. Ultimately, we decided we would wait until noon before heading back to our campsite. The plan was to then quickly pack up all of our stuff and make the trek back to our cars, cutting our trip 5 days short. Fast forward to noon, and we started cautiously heading back. When we arrived, the sight we were met with was nothing short of horrifying. Our campsite had been completely ransacked, almost all of our stuff had been damaged. This is thousands of dollars in equipment we're talking about. But most disturbing were the bullet holes shot into our tents. You don't have to be that smart to conclude that these people had genuinely tried to kill us. Further supporting this theory is the fact that nothing was actually stolen from our campsite, it was all just damaged. As far as who did this, we don't know. The only people we can really pin as suspects are the 3 people that walked up to us as we were building our tents. But this begs the question, why? Why would they do this? The whole experience has left us with more questions than answers. Nothing about it makes much sense, but I know I myself just feel lucky to be alive. In the end, we quickly salvaged all the equipment we could and made the trek back to our cars. Enzo is an avid hiker who in 2016 was visiting his brother in upstate New York near Downsville. Enzo's brother owns a small house and a barn up there, and from time to time, Enzo and other family members would go up to visit. This was in the late fall, and so the foliage was already mostly orange and more than half of the leaves had fallen off the trees. Enzo was hiking a narrow trail which was not far from his brother's place. This trail is in the middle of a very rural area and it connects from the occasional property to property. So when Enzo stumbled across a duffel bag on the ground in the middle of the woods, it was a surprise. The duffel bag looked like it was relatively new. It didn't look dirty as if it had been sitting in the woods for an extended period of time. There was a foul odor emanating from the bag, however, like something rotting inside. Enzo assumed the worst, but he knew he had to open the bag to see what was inside in case it actually could have been a person. He was building up the courage to open the zipper to the bag, but before he could, he heard footsteps approaching from off the trail and a voice saying, "That's mine, please don't touch it." A large man in a dirty jacket and jeans was quickly approaching from the woods and grabbed the duffel bag off the ground. The two exchanged looks for a moment. Enzo told the man he assumed the bag was forgotten by someone, and the man told him he was storing his kill from his hunt in the bag. Even though Enzo isn't a hunter, he knew it's standard to use a cooler for storing fresh kill, not a duffel bag of all things. This also wouldn't explain the foul smell so soon, as usually dead bodies only start to smell after a few days, not right after death. So he apologized and continued walking down the trail with a little more speed in his step. It's likely the man noticed Enzo's nervousness because he heard the duffel bag get dropped on the floor as he was walking away, but as he looked back, he didn't see the man anymore. Enzo nervously continued along the trail, taking out his phone to try to call his brother for an emergency pickup by the road, but he didn't have any reception in the woods. All he could do was press forward and avoid crossing paths with that man again. But as he continued on, he kept hearing leaves crunching from not far behind him, and any time he'd look back, the coast seemed clear. Eventually, his fear that he was being followed became real. He saw that man following him in the distance in a stalkerish manner, hiding behind a tree. Without thinking, Enzo started to run as fast as he could down the trail. He knew he was being followed without even looking back because he could hear the leaves being crushed not too far behind him. Enzo came to an abandoned-looking property with overgrown grass, and having grown too winded to continue running, he attempted entry to the old house through the back door and was able to get inside. Enzo hid under a cot in the first bedroom he found, and he heard the back door open again, followed by heavy footsteps moving in a hurry. They went from room to room, and Enzo could hear the man's heavy breathing from also being out of breath. The man's footsteps came into the bedroom just for a second and left right after. He didn't look under either of the two cots. Enzo heard the back door to the house open and slam shut again, but he laid under the cot for another half an hour, not taking any risks. He only got up when he realized it would be dark soon and he needed to get to a road to call for help. He proceeded to leave the house and run down the dirt trail by the house that was most likely once used as a driveway, which led him to a road. From there, he eventually hitched a ride with a passing car who gave Enzo a lift back to his brother's house, where Enzo would call the local police department and report his encounter. Given the severity of the case, police showed up at the house to get a more detailed description of the man's face, the location it happened, and other information. Though it was never technically confirmed what was in that duffel bag, the rotting smell would already be clue enough. But the fact that the man so intently chased after Enzo shows that he was hiding something that he didn't want any witnesses for, most likely dumping a dead body all. I'm sure you've seen some of the more modern videos online where truckers document their daily routines and provide tips for each other. Or maybe you haven't, but being as I'm on the younger side in this industry, every time I open TikTok or YouTube Shorts, that's all I see. I won't get into it, but I had to drop out of a pretty prestigious university for some personal reasons, and people always tell me I could have been more than a trucker. It's honestly not a bad gig though. I've been making deliveries for north of 2 years. Obviously, the only strenuous part of the job is the long hours. You can never truly gauge how the isolation will affect you without experiencing it firsthand. My only advice would be to make peace with whatever demons might be lurking in your subconscious, because they'll definitely eat at your brain in the lonely hours. That's what happened to me anyway. This happened to me 3 months after getting employed by my first company. I was basically as new in this trade as one could get. I was driving from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a 12-hour drive. 12 hours driving might not seem that crazy, but factor in the fact that I had just completed an 8-hour trip, and that should put things into perspective. I wanted to get deliveries done as quickly as possible, so I opted to drive through the night. I'd get to Lafayette just before 3 a.m. Things were going smoothly. There were virtually no other cars on the road, so I was able to push the semi a little faster than normal. About halfway through the drive, I remember reaching down at the center console to chug a Red Bull, but there weren't any. Of course, I had forgotten to restock my truck after completing my previous delivery. After slapping my dashboard a few times, I groaned in frustration, knowing I'd have to stop somewhere. There was nothing I hated more than having to make stops during my drives. I might be unique in this, but I always get exponentially more tired when my vehicle is immobile, even if I'm only stopped for like 20 seconds. After glancing up at the navigation, I figured I had no choice, either fall asleep on the road or stop and get an energy drink. In my brain, those options were pretty much equivalent. Reluctantly, I pulled into the first service stop I saw. I had literally no clue where I was, probably somewhere in Ohio at this point. Too late, I realized this wasn't actually a service stop. It was what looked like an abandoned gas station and a repurposed convenience store. Not sure if there's any better way to describe it. Either way, it looked like there was another quick stop store not far up the road, so I figured I'd go there if anything. I parked the semi. I made my way over to the first convenience store. To be completely honest, I was expecting one of two things to happen: either the place would be open, or the door would be locked. You can imagine my surprise then when the door swung open into a pitch-black store. I looked around, hoping maybe I'd get lucky and there would be a drink or snack left behind. Just before I was about to turn around, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I picked up on a faint glow emanating from the corner of the room. I made my way over to it, and the glow turned out to be coming from a back room of some sort. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door slowly. To my pleasant surprise, there was a plugged-in refrigerator against the wall. Eagerly, I opened the door but found nothing. Literally nothing. The shelves had been removed, the whole appliance had been gutted. As I was shutting the door, I was 90% certain I heard a clatter from the main room, like something hitting the floor. I froze for a good 10 seconds. Had I imagined it? There was no way. Quietly, I walked back into the main room and looked around. Nothing. Part of me wanted to keep investigating, but I didn't have time for this. I walked out the entrance door and basically jogged to the other shop. It was open, thank God. I paid for my drink and made it back to my truck. Something about this whole stop felt wrong. I needed to get back on the road as soon as possible. I took one last glance at the abandoned store and noticed the door was now open. I was 100% positive I had shut it behind me. It wasn't my job to figure out what was going on here, so I started the engine and merged my semi back onto the highway. The caffeine started kicking in and snapped me out of my tired haze pretty quickly. My mind began to wander, and I started thinking about how bizarre that whole thing had actually been. I guess a squatter or an abandoned building wasn't the strangest thing in the world, but my brain couldn't explain that refrigerator, no matter what theory I thought of. I tried to forget about it and kept driving. It was then that I started noticing weird movements in the curtain behind me. Sweat started dripping down my forehead. I watched in the rearview mirror as the curtain seemed to billow and move, even though I didn't have the air on. I thought the worst, there was someone in my truck. I didn't have any weapons on me or anything, so I discreetly punched in the nearest police station on my phone. The drive there was the most tense and horrifying 20 minutes of my life. I kept imagining that person reaching out to grab me or trying to crash my truck. Finally, I approached the police station. I stopped the semi as close as I possibly could get and basically ran over to the police station. In seconds, my truck was surrounded by police, and after I opened the back, what I saw will stay with me for life. The police pulled out 3 homeless-looking people, 2 men and 1 woman. They were wearing rags and were wrapped in nasty-looking blankets. One of the men was armed with 2 switchblades. All 3 of them refused to talk but stared menacingly at me as they were getting cuffed. I have no idea what they wanted. I don't think I'll ever know. About 7 years ago, on my way home from my parents' house, I experienced something truly terrifying. I was 22, young, naive, and well, dumb. I had just moved into my first apartment, becoming the first in my family to leave our sleepy old train town. I visited home every Sunday to see my family, do laundry, and enjoy Sunday dinner. I lived about 45 minutes up the highway, so I generally headed home by 6 p.m. On this particular night, there was a relentless summer thunderstorm that had been pouring down rain all day. Just as I was packing up to leave after dinner, my cousins dropped in, so I ended up sticking around for a few more hours to visit. I left my mom's around 10 p.m. in the pouring rain. This was the first time after moving out that I encountered something that truly scared me. I never told anyone about this, possibly out of pride. Everyone always gave me trouble about living alone as a single female in a new area. Anyway, here it goes. I left my parents' house around 10 p.m. in the pouring rain. I'm driving down the service road that leads out of town and eventually turns into the on-ramp to the highway. As you leave town, the service road turns into 1 lane right in front of a quarry train loading station. I'm not really clear on what that place is, but it always gave me the creeps. If you're unfortunate enough to pass through when a train is crossing the road to load, you'll be stuck there for a while. Once the road passes the tracks, it turns back into 2 lanes and goes up a steep hill. As I'm approaching the quarry, I can make out the orange lights on a red cab 18-wheeler sitting in the quarry parking lot. Mind you, it's pouring rain, visibility is low, so I can't make out the trucker until I'm pretty close to him. As soon as I can see it's a trucker, he pulls out into the road. I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting the trailer on the back of the truck. I skid around on the road until I regained control of the car. Now I'm stuck behind this dummy who just pulled out without paying attention. I keep my distance because I'm flustered. For the record, my headlights were on, so if he had been paying attention, he should have seen me. Honestly, with the heavy rain and low visibility, who knows? So, I'm behind this guy as we cross the tracks and begin to climb the steep hill. Despite it turning into 2 lanes on the hill, he's driving right up the middle of the 2 lanes. Figuring he didn't realize it was 2 lanes, I just putter along behind him, keeping my distance. As soon as he reaches the peak of the hill and the road levels out, he moves over to the right lane. Yes, finally. So, I move over and begin to pass him. As soon as I get past the front of the truck, he swerves behind me quite abruptly and begins flashing his high beams at me. Usually, when someone flashes their lights behind you in our area, it means turn on your lights, but mine were already on. I checked as soon as he started flashing at me. Weirded out, I put my blinker on and safely change lanes to get out of his way. He follows my lane change and begins laying on his horn. The honking startled me, and I began to get a lot more flustered. What the hell did this guy want? I moved out of his way and my headlights were on. Why didn't I just speed up and zip away, you may be asking. Well, I grew up in this area. It had been raining heavily all day, and I knew that the service road floods a little in heavy rain, both on the shoulders and in random spots in the middle of the lanes. It's a small Midwestern town, our roads are shitty. I had already skidded and nearly wrecked once, and I wasn't about to floor it on this bumpy, flooded service road and risk wrecking again. There is nothing between that quarry and the highway, just about 4 or 5 miles of wooded area. If I wrecked, it would have been just him and me. This went on for the next 4 or 5 miles to the highway. He began tailgating me in addition to the high beams and honking. Once the tailgating began, I was in tears. I didn't know what this guy wanted from me. I was just trying to stay out of his way and get home safely. That's all I wanted. I changed lanes 2 more times, making 3 total. He followed me from lane to lane. As we approached the highway, I floored it. He couldn't accelerate quickly enough to keep up, and I lost him finally. As soon as I realized I'd lost him and was safe on the highway, I just lost it. I was a hysterical wreck. There is only one exit after getting on the highway to stop in the small town the highway runs through. After that, it's all wooded for a good 30 minutes. Here's a more structured and coherent version of your text with appropriate pauses. I thought about getting off at that exit to calm down and pull myself together, but I just wanted to go home, so I sped right past it. I should have stopped. Once the city was no longer visible in my rearview mirror, I felt much calmer. I managed to scramble my cell out of my purse and put it in my lap just in case. The rain led up to a drizzle the further I went, but I was still pretty on edge. There weren't many other cars on the highway, and most of them were truckers. I'm cruising along in the center lane when the truck next to me in the passing lane begins blaring the horn and moves into my lane, forcing me over to the 3rd lane. He continued moving over, nearly forcing me off the highway. I sped up and changed lanes right in front of him so that I'm back in the center lane. I slowed down until I was in line with the front cab. I double-clicked the home button on my phone, camera shortcut, and rolled down my window, starting to take pictures of the cabbie. I think the flashes made him realize what I was doing, and he began slowing down until he was behind me again. I got a lot of pictures. I sped up and lost sight of him behind me. I was satisfied I managed to get pictures, but I was so angry at this point. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway and waited for him. I just wanted to get behind him so I could get a picture of the license plate and report this. Sadly, he was on to me for sure. I noticed headlights behind me a long way back, but behind me nonetheless, on the shoulder of the highway. I waited, keeping an eye on the truckers passing me by, just to be sure I didn't miss him. I noticed a shadow pass through the headlights of the truck, which spooked me quite a bit. Did he get out of the cab? I didn't stick around to find out. I just took off and got home as quickly as possible. The pictures were a total failure. It was still drizzling. The flash combined with the drizzle just resulted in washing out the pictures. I could see the red cab, but no matter what filters I used, there was no making out exactly what the cab said. Red cab trucker, you're the reason I have a dash cam in my car. Well, I would never hitchhike alone. I was 18 at the time and had just started college, living out of state on my own for the first time. I had a pretty sheltered life. I am also a female, so my first semester at my out-of-state college had just ended. It was May, and I was on my way home from my brother's wedding. I'm about an hour away from my current residence, with a little over 3 hours left of my trip. Everything is going great, and I'm just cruising with the traffic. It was a notably busy day for that particular stretch of interstate, somewhere on I-40 in Tennessee. As I said, all was well until I checked my mirror. There was a truck a little farther back from the side of my car in the lane next to me. I could see his headlights in my passenger side mirror. I looked up because, even though it was the middle of the afternoon and super sunny out, this dude was flashing his lights at me. I tried to brush it off and assumed he just wanted to get into my lane, so I tried moving. He stayed behind me the whole time, not letting any other cars get between us. He kept flashing his lights at me, and I looked up at him. He waved and honked. This was a red flag, but I took it the wrong way. I thought, oh, I wonder if he's signaling me to pull over. I hope nothing is wrong with my car. The only reason I thought this was because, the week before, I had gotten a hole in my tire and had it patched. I was worried that the patch had fallen out and that my tire was going flat as I traveled. I'm freaking out about my car and plan to pull off at the next exit. Fortunately, it comes up quickly, and there is a gas station with some customers visible from the exit ramp. I head there and pull up at a gas pump. Curiously, the trucker follows me off the interstate and into the same parking lot, but he parks in a designated truck zone. I get out just before he parks and walk around my car, doing a quick inspection. I see him start to get out of his truck, and I decide to buy gas, even though I filled up before I left. As I swiped my card to pay for my gas, the truck driver had reached my car. Lucky for me, since I was already pretty freaked out by him following me off the exit, I had my phone in my hand with 911 already dialed, so I would just have to hit the call button. I left my driver door open and stayed between that and the gas hose, with him standing a few feet away from the back end of my car, the hose separating us. The first thing this guy says to me is, "Well, aren't you a pretty thing?" I'm screaming in my head now, imagining all possible scenarios for an emergency escape. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s and about 170 pounds. Me, I was 18, 125 pounds, without much muscle or fat anywhere on me. I wouldn't have been able to fight back much anyway. I told him thank you. He offered to buy my gas, and I declined, saying my parents gave me money. I was actually worried that he would expect something in return if I had taken his offer. He asked me questions like where I was from, where I was going, etc. Something went off in my head that just said lie, so I did. I didn't tell him what college I really went to, where I was really headed, or what I was doing. Nothing. My gas was done pumping after about a minute. With that, I told him goodbye, jumped in my car, and got out of there. I kept an eye on him as I left, making sure he didn't follow me any longer, and he didn't. I never saw him again. I don't know what he wanted with me that day, whether it was just to tell me how attractive I was or if he had something much worse planned. I really regret not reporting him to the police. A few months ago, I was driving back to school from visiting my parents. It's about a 2-hour drive, so I usually keep myself entertained with music. I'm a 5 feet 3 inches, 21-year-old female driving my dad's little old pickup truck alone in the leftmost lane of a 3-lane highway, dorking around to the music on the radio. Suddenly, I noticed a semi-truck going the exact same speed as me in the rightmost lane. Embarrassed for getting caught in dork mode, I stopped singing and tried to speed up so he couldn't see me anymore. He matched my speed, which ticked me off a little bit, so I looked at the driver, expecting to see some angry jerk. To my surprise, he was smiling and waving. Thrown off, I kind of chuckled and waved back. Big mistake. He moved over to the middle lane to be closer to me and now wouldn't stop smiling and waving. At first, I played nice, waving back a little because a semi-truck beats a tiny pickup truck any day. But I was mostly focusing on getting out of this guy's field of vision safely. I tried speeding up as fast as my truck would allow and slowing down as suddenly as I could without endangering anyone behind me, but he would just match my speed. If there was someone coming up in his lane, he'd move to the right at the last possible second and pass them before I could slow down and get behind them. He has a lot more practice with reckless maneuvering than I do, so he has me trapped and is using other cars to help him. The whole time, he's smiling, waving, and holding up the number 1 sign for some reason I still don't know. His charm is rapidly fading as this continues for about 5 miles. I got worried and called 911. I gave them a description of the truck: white cargo truck, black cab with some Pennsylvania company logo on it, and the driver was a balding, middle-aged tan guy with a dirty blue t-shirt. They advised me to pull off to the emergency shoulder on the left, but I had never done that and it looked too narrow, so I didn't feel comfortable doing that. At this point, he was passing someone else in the middle lane, and I finally had a chance to slow down and merge 2 lanes over to the rightmost lane. I started speeding past him so he couldn't trap me again. The operator told me to take the closest service plaza about 5 miles away. She said he probably wouldn't follow me, so I could stop there for a few minutes before getting back on the highway. She told me to call if he did follow me, but she was confident he probably wouldn't, so she hung up. Now he's still holding up the sign and smiling this creepy, increasingly perverted grin at me while I avoid eye contact. The service plaza is in a quarter mile, and I'm not using any turn signals, but I guess he knew what I was doing because he braked hard and merged behind me right at the last second to join me in exiting to the service plaza. After I got my heart to start back up from the coronary area just experienced, I called 911 again. The way this service plaza was set up was that semi-trucks had to use a separate lane winding to the right of the plaza that led to a parking lot behind the plaza just for big trucks. The rest of us used a smaller lane to park immediately in front of the plaza. I parked, and as I'm explaining to the new operator what's going on, I watched the semi creep around its path while the driver stared me down, smiling. I freaked out. He knew where I had parked, he knew where to find me. If I just stayed there, I thought maybe I could have floored it to get back on the highway, but I was afraid he would see me and follow me again. So, I drove to a gas station to the left of the plaza, which had a view of the semi-truck parking lot, hoping he wouldn't find me until the police came. The operator transferred me to the woman who was helping me before. She informed me that they had dispatched a couple of police cars but couldn't tell me how long they would be. I saw the trucker had gotten out of his truck and was heading towards me. Even though my windows were closed and my doors were locked, I was panicking on the phone with the operator. She told me the police should be there soon and that I should be safe there, so I should sit tight while I kept her updated. I wanted to at least drive back to the parking lot I was in before, but it was a one-way entrance to the gas station, so I couldn't. I glared at the trucker and showed him my phone when he came close. He finally stopped smiling and made it look like he was going into the service plaza. I looked in my right side view mirror and found him hiding behind a big white pillar in front of the plaza, staring at me again. I freaked out and asked the operator where the cops were and if I could leave because he was being ultra creepy. She told me to sit tight again because they should be there any minute, so I did. Then he came out of hiding and started walking towards my truck. I put it in drive just in case and told the operator what he was doing. I refused to make eye contact with him but kept watching my mirrors to make sure I knew where he was. The smile was back, and he started walking in circles around my truck, looking at it as if looking for a way to get in. I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until he circled back behind me, floored it, and told the operator I wasn't waiting one more second for the police. She apologized and told me the police would look for the man and talk to him if they found him, and that I should focus on getting home safely while keeping an eye out for him. I don't know if they did that or not, but I know none of that would have happened if I had my boyfriend with me. So not only can't I walk alone, but I also can't drive alone as a female. Nice to know. The sound that woke me this time was clear, loud, and right outside the door. It was the sound of a man clearing his throat, the sound someone makes when they want your attention. My eyes shot up, and I moved to the glass, and there, just peeking over the lip of the door, I can see someone looking into my cab. I freeze, hoping they can't see me, but it doesn't matter. This guy's eyes are rolling back and forth, taking it all in, looking for whoever is inside. He looks crazy, like he'd given himself a haircut with a butter knife. Some of it was shaved, some of it was long, and I could see nicks along his scalp. I think his eyebrows were shaved off too, but it was hard to tell in the moonlight. I could literally feel this guy pulling on the door handle, making the entire truck move. I did the only thing that I could think of, shout as loud as I could. "What do you want?" I hollered at the glass, still motionless in the back of the cab. This is also a censored conversation, as I remember swearing in literally every sentence that I spoke to this guy. He said, "It's me." "Who?" I asked. Okay, maybe this was a case of a mix-up. I sat up and reached for the club on the floor. "It's Henry, come on," he pleaded. "I don't know you. I'm not from here. Now please just get away from my truck," I explained to him. The conversation devolved from that point forward. Playing hard to get. I like it. "Let's do something different," he said. This guy went on at length about what he wanted to do to me. None of it involved violence at all. Everything this guy said was sexual from start to finish. I'm watching this guy lick the window of my semi as he tells me he wants to kiss my feet, worship me, pleasure every part of me. I'm not homophobic, but the whole thing was nauseating. As he's going on and on and on about his sexual fantasies, transitioning into what he wants me to do to him, I'm yelling for him to just please go away. Throughout the entire thing, his tone changes. He starts talking about his desires, which were much more violent. This guy wanted someone to hurt him during their sexual escapades, punched, choked, tied up, and abused, the whole shebang. I couldn't really believe what I was hearing. He switched from licking the window to tapping on it before finally smashing his fist into the glass. I had to do something. I remembered my portable DVD player and, for whatever reason, came up with this weird little plan. I opened it up and faced it away from the front of the cab so the light would illuminate my face, but he wouldn't be able to see what the light was coming from. "I'm calling the police," I said, hoping the light source would look like a car phone or a radio. "I've got your South Dakota plates too." "Nathan?" he asked. "I'm not who you're looking for." "Now get the hell out of here, man," was the last thing that I ever said to this person. I watched him leap down and start running all in one swift motion. The van fired up and, without even turning its headlights on, fled from the parking lot like a bat out of hell. Honestly, I ended up doing the same. After another inspection of the trailer and tires to make sure everything was secure, I rolled out and made for Livingston. That morning, I really played with the idea of calling the police and making some kind of report, but thought it would be more trouble than it was actually worth. I didn't have the actual plate number, just that it was a Dakota van, so I figured my report would go absolutely nowhere. It wasn't until I got out of trucking that I realized how common this type of encounter was, especially after the invention of Craigslist. Truck stops have always been known for midnight rendezvous, but became explicit for random hookups all over the country, particularly for traveling men who wanted to experiment. Whoever that Henry guy was, he thought I was Richard, who was probably another trucker rolling through Montana that night. Henry must have gotten the truck station mixed up, or Richard was late to the arrival, so he got us confused. Regardless and whatever the case, I'm very glad that I had my doors locked that night, as I could be telling a very different story right now. Have a plan when you hit the road and always stick to that plan. I faced a grim battle with a rare blood cancer, one that offered little hope for recovery. With the harsh reality of my condition looming over me, I made the tough call to forego treatment, accepting the uncertain road ahead with a heavy heart. In the weeks leading up to Christmas of the year in question, our secluded farm on New Zealand's South Island bore witness to a peculiar phenomenon. Strange lights danced across the evening skies, their erratic movements defying explanation. At first, we mistook them for PLS, but their sudden shifts and unpredictable patterns hinted at something more enigmatic. Our farm, nestled in solitude and isolation, seemed a world unto itself, far removed from the chaos of urban life. The sightings of these mysterious lights became our own private intrigue. We refrained from discussing it with anyone. One night, a week before Christmas, as we sat down for dinner, I noticed through the window a light descending on the paddock next to the house. When it touched the ground, I could see it was a disc-shaped craft. Instinct kicked in, and I reached for my trusted hunting rifle, hands quivering with a blend of fear and determination. But before I could even grasp it, they emerged creatures straight out of a nightmare, their insect-like forms contorting in the dim light of our home. There they were, right inside our lounge. No idea how they so suddenly entered. It's like they just materialized. Their presence suffocated the air. It felt like the gaze of these four beings pierced one's very person. We were in a state of hypershock. Mary stood behind me, arms protectively enveloping our daughter. Mary recalls our innocent Leah seemed wondrously amused by the creatures, while Mary and I were in a state of pure anxiety and dread. We stood frozen, trapped by an invisible grip, unable to break free from the fear that held us in place. Despite my efforts, my limbs refused to obey, rendering my weapon useless against the encroaching darkness. I don't think any words can describe what was going through my mind at that time. While you are reading or listening to this, imagine for a while being in such a bizarre and threatening situation. While doubting my eyesight at that moment, in fact, doubting my very sanity, I simultaneously am confronted with protecting my wife and child against creatures that can simply materialize or dematerialize as they please. All of this while they control my body, rendering me absolutely incapable of my duty as protector of my young family. The entire thing is simply too ghastly to describe. That experience left a lasting mark on me. As swiftly as they had appeared, they vanished, leaving us trembling in the wake of their inexplicable visitation. This eerie experience was a chilling reminder of our vulnerability in the vast expanse of the unknown. As Christmas Eve enveloped us, the air buzzed with the anticipation of the cherished family gathering in festive mart. The following day, our joint families were driving all the way to spend Christmas Day at our place, stay over the night, and drive back on Boxing Day. Despite the shadow cast by my illness, we had painstakingly prepared for the occasion, fueled by the promise of love and laughter that awaited us. Mary, ever the embodiment of resilience, orchestrated the culinary symphony in the kitchen with practiced finesse. The aroma of roasting turkey and freshly baked pies wafted through the air, a tantalizing preview of the warmth and joy that awaited us on the morrow. Yet beneath the facade of holiday jubilation lurked a solemn reality, a truth I had grudgingly come to terms with. This would be my final Christmas, a poignant reminder of life's transience and the relentless march of time. The events of the previous week were still on our minds, but as it caused no harm except for freaking us out, we decided that we would not let it feature in our thoughts for the next few days. If only it was going to be that simple. As the night wore on and darkness blanketed our home, a disturbance shattered the tranquility. I jolted awake, a sense of disquiet creeping through me like a silent specter in the night. Emerging from the comfort of my bed, I stumbled into the enveloping darkness, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. As I bore witness to a sight that terrified me, one of those very same otherworldly creatures was in our house. As I stood in the hallway, I saw it slipping into Leah's room like a phantom in the night. It seemed not to notice me, or maybe it was simply not bothered by my presence. Fear spurred me onward, my footsteps resounding through the silent corridors as I hastened to my daughter's side, only to find her bed and room empty. They had taken her, but how? Panic seized me. I grasped for the phone, desperate for aid in the face of the unknown, but fate, it seemed, had different plans. The telephone lines remained eerily silent, they were dead. The familiar hum was replaced by a chilling stillness beside me. Mary stood, her features etched with a blend of fear and disbelief. We found ourselves adrift in a sea of uncertainty, our world unraveling with each passing moment. Suddenly, there was a flash of light. I thought it was the craft outside taking off, whisking our daughter away, only the Lord knows where to. And then, as if beckoned by some unseen force, a wave of dizziness swept over us. The next moment, I felt sick. I remember Mary saying her head was spinning. Strangely, we both fell unconscious right there by the phone, both of us at the same time. If it was not so strange, I would have said our collapse was brought on by sheer shock, but I firmly believe it was something else. Look, both Mary and I, even amidst my illness, were pretty level-headed people. We were not the type to simply faint. The morning broke with the events of the night before veiled in a haze of uncertainty. As awareness slowly returned, I found solace beneath the covers. Mary's reassuring presence by my side offered comfort in the midst of turmoil. The covers in bed. How did we get to bed? My last memory was of us losing consciousness in the hall by the phone. But then a worse memory, Leah. They've taken Leah. Then something unexpected and beautiful happened. A sweet, innocent voice beckoned us from our slumber, drawing us to the warmth of the lounge. There, bathed in the soft morning light, sat Leah. Her laughter was a melody that chased away the dread and fear. Relief washed over us like a tidal wave, cleansing our hearts of doubt and anxiety. She was safe, untouched by the darkness that had threatened to consume us. We held her close, her embrace the ultimate gift I would receive on that Christmas day. As we basked in the joy of her presence, a sense of peace settled over our home, a peace forged by the unbreakable bond of family. We never discussed the events of the previous night or days with our family. Despite the horrific events leading up to our Christmas, the day itself turned out to be a beautiful experience of love and joy. As it was going to be my last, I only wanted to focus on making that Christmas the best memory for Mary, Leah, and our folks. We kept it that way throughout the festive season. New Year's came and was another joyous event with friends and family. Yet after that, life had to return to its normal routine, and with that returned the doubt and fear. Beneath the surface, a lingering doubt nagged at us, a question unanswered. What had truly transpired on that fateful night, and why did Leah's memories remain veiled in mystery, her innocence untainted by the chaos that had engulfed us? We sought answers as the new year broke. Without revealing too much, as we did not want them to think we were crazy, we had Leah checked out by a pediatrician and a psychologist. Both found her to be in excellent health and showed zero signs of trauma of any kind. So the truth remained elusive. Leah, a beacon of hope, stood unwavering in her innocence, her laughter a reminder of the resilience of youth in the face of uncertainty. However, her apparent lack of any trauma amidst what happened to her puzzled us. Yet, we were grateful our daughter was unscathed by whatever happened to her. Then February came, and it was time for my visit to the oncologist. Even though I knew what the path forward looked like, these visits were required to manage my condition as best as the clinicians could. I steeled myself for the tests and examinations. Blood was taken, and we had to be back for a follow-up the next day. I prepared for the inevitable affirmation that the cancer was staying its course. My only dread was that it might be speeding up, which would mean even less time with my family. When the specialist finally entered with an expression of confusion, I knew he had further bad news for us. Then our world changed. His words, when they came, shattered the darkness like a beam of light. Your cancer is gone. I will never forget his words. I remember him saying something like, "You are extraordinarily lucky. This type of cancer simply does not disappear by itself. Besides, severe cases like yours have never been successfully treated. Yet, here you are, clean, without any treatment." More tests were done, but they all confirmed the same. It was a miracle, pure and simple, a reprieve from the brink of death that defied all reason. Jubilation surged through me as we made our way home, hope and gratitude intertwining in a dance of newfound life. Yet with all that I had to celebrate, something was unresolved. At the edges of my consciousness, something was awakening, an unwelcome guest in the midst of celebration. And then, like a storm on the horizon, the nightmares descended, a relentless onslaught of visions and memories, each more nightmarish than the last. Strange lights and alien faces haunted my dreams, their presence a specter that loomed over me in the dead of night. With each passing day, the memories grew more vivid, more visceral, until the terror etched into my being. I relived the ordeal in agonizing detail, the chill of extraterrestrial surgical instruments, the pain of probing, incisions, grotesque needles, and more, all inflicted by beings that seemed devoid of empathy or remorse. Amidst the darkness, a paradox emerged. It was bittersweet, for within their cruelty, the insectoid creatures bestowed upon me a gift beyond measure, a second chance at life, burned through pain, sheer dread, and horror. The ordeal is too harrowing to recount in further detail. I cannot fathom why the creatures subjected me to such torment. Lily, now married with 3 beautiful children, remains as joyful and vibrant as ever. Untouched by the events that transpired all those years ago, despite undergoing regression hypnosis at our urging, she recalls nothing of significance. Curiously, it appears she was never abducted. Sarah and I seem to have manufactured memories of searching for her at home. Sarah never developed any nightmares or memories even remotely like mine. After all our anxieties about the apparent abduction of Lily, it seems that I was the only one who got taken. The motives behind the creatures' actions remain shrouded in mystery. Nevertheless, their intervention led to my survival. Faced with the choice between enduring these haunting memories and succumbing to cancer, is there truly a choice? Thousands of beautiful memories created by a long and fulfilling family life have made the horror of the abduction 100% worth it. This is the story of my freshman year in college. I went to a smaller university. There were only a few thousand students that attended it, so the campus wasn't very large. But I liked that about this place. However, my first year I had to live in the dorms to save a little bit of money and maybe make a friend. I chose to have a random roommate. This decision backfired. I didn't know anybody at the college when I got there, and the first person that I met was the roommate. He told me that his name was Dermot. Dermot was a strange guy overall. He was rude, unfriendly, and he never left the room other than to go to class. He was not at all the type of person that I would normally hang out with, and by the second week, I had given up all hope of being friends with him. I had a TV and a PS4 that I brought with me to school, and Dermot said that I could never use it because it bothered him. He also demanded that all lights be off after dark. I tried to reason with him once, but he threatened to report me to the dean of students. I wasn't scared by the threat. I didn't really think they would do anything. But I would rather just try to get along with my roommate instead. I would do my studying in class buildings around campus. I made other friends at college pretty quickly, and when I was talking with them about Dermot one day, they suggested that I get a new room. I hadn't even realized this was an option until they told me, so I put in a request to get my own solo dorm room. I was told that when one came available, they would contact me. About 2 weeks later, so now about a month and a half into the school year, I was contacted. I was told that I could move into a different dorm building that was across the street. This building was a little bit newer and nicer. It had a room that was available, and I accepted it. I decided not to even tell Dermot. I didn't know if he would be happy or sad about it, but I didn't want him thinking that I hated him or something. So one day, when Dermot was gone at his classes at a time that I didn't have class, I packed up all my stuff and just left without saying a word. My entire half of the room was now gone. I moved into my new building and got my new room. It was so nice to finally have a place all to myself. I could watch TV, play PlayStation, and not have any complaints. I could even have my friends over to hang out. However, I did want to be careful not to see my old roommate Dermot. Like I said, it was a small campus, so there was a chance that we would cross paths. If we did, I didn't want him to ask me why I left or something. I was careful to avoid him, and I didn't see him at all for a couple of days. As for my new room, at first it was great, but on probably the second or third night that I was there, something happened. I was playing video games late at night, and I heard somebody try to open my door. It was locked, so it didn't open. After a few seconds, I got up to look out of my peephole. When I was walking towards the door, I heard somebody knock on it. There weren't even that many people that knew I lived here yet, so I found this to be really strange. When I got to the door, I saw Dermot standing there. I did not want to answer it, and I quietly moved away from the door. He knocked one more time, and I didn't answer that either. I was really creeped out. I mean, how did he even know that I lived here? I didn't tell him, and I wasn't friends with him on Snapchat or anything where he could see my location. This was really strange. I went back and looked like 15 minutes later, and he was finally gone. I didn't know why he came here. There was no reason that I could think of. Well, the next morning I got up and had to go to class. When I left my room, I walked down a couple of hallways to get to the front of the building. In one of the hallways was a sort of lounge study area. When I was approaching it, I saw Dermot sitting in one of the chairs there. I couldn't believe that he was in my dorm building. He didn't live here. I didn't know what he was doing. I turned around and left out of another exit. I thought maybe he was following me. It was really, really strange. Later on in that same day, I was walking on campus, and I happened to notice him again. There were a lot of other people walking around, and I saw him a ways behind me. I walked back to my dorm building, and he seemed to almost follow me there. He wasn't walking close enough to follow me inside or anything, but I was very suspicious when I noticed. I got back in my building and was wondering what this guy's problem was. Well, that same night he was back at my room once more. I was up late, and he tried entering. It was locked like always, and he then knocked on the door. This time it was louder than before. I didn't answer but was watching him through the peephole. He knocked again very loudly, but I still did nothing. When he knocked for a third time, I remember somebody else who lived down the hall opened up their door. They told him to quiet down. Dermot didn't say anything. Then he stood there for probably a minute. After that, he backed up a step and then kicked my door extremely loud and hard. I was honestly afraid that the door might break, but it didn't. Dermot then turned and stormed off. After this, I made up my mind that I was going to report him, and the next day I did. Somebody must have talked to him or something because I stopped seeing him after that, and he did not return to my room. I was still very suspicious that he would follow me around or show up again or something for like a month, but luckily he didn't. A while after this, I met somebody that used to know him. They weren't really his friend but had several classes with him. They told me that he had dropped out and also said that his name wasn't even Dermot. None of these things really surprised me. I'm not sure why he gave me a fake name, but he was a weird guy. Looking back, I'm really glad that I moved out when I did. It was my junior year of college. I had moved off campus into a student apartment building. My roommate was sort of assigned to me by the school in the sense that he was just someone else who needed someone to live with. His name was Arlo, and he seemed like a nice guy at first. He was friendly and polite, always smiling and making small talk. But as the days went by, I started to notice strange things about him, little quirks and odd behaviors that made me feel uneasy. It started with the way Arlo would always linger in my room, asking pushy questions about my personal life and poking around my belongings as if he were way too comfortable doing so. At first, I brushed it off as harmless curiosity, even if I found it kind of weird. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. Then there were the sounds I would hear coming from Arlo's room late at night, talking and shuffling noises that were slightly concerning. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just Arlo watching TV or talking on the phone, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. One night, unable to sleep because of the strange noises coming from Arlo's room, I decided to investigate. I crept silently down the hallway and pressed my ear against Arlo's door, straining to hear what was going on inside. What I heard was just weird. It was the sound of Arlo whispering to himself, his voice low and muffled. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped, and there was nothing but silence. Then I heard, "Kane," Arlo said my name. Did he somehow know I was outside his door? I quickly and quietly tiptoed away from his door and went back to my room. I silently crawled back into my bed. I didn't know what to make of this. Why was Arlo talking to himself? Was he hiding something from me, or was he sleepwalking? But then, how did he know I was outside of his room? I couldn't shake the feeling of uneasiness. The next day, I kept thinking about the night before. As the days went by and the sounds from Arlo's room persisted, my paranoia only grew worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that Arlo was hiding something from me. Arlo's behavior also became stranger. I started to notice little subtle changes in his behavior, like he would make strange glances at me, and his movements seemed a little furtive. One night, I woke up at some off hour in the night and heard Arlo's whispering voice from outside in the hallway, like right outside my door. It was genuinely freaking me out, and I was wondering if he was sleepwalking. I went to the door and put my ear up against it, and like last time, the whispering stopped. Then Arlo once again said, "Kane." This time I replied and said, "Yeah, you good?" He didn't respond. I just heard his footsteps walk away to his room. The following night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door closing. I heard Arlo's footsteps walking away in the hallway. This was getting out of hand. The next day, I decided to confront him about his potential sleepwalking. I told him I'd been hearing him walking around late at night and heard him close my door last night. I then asked him if he had ever been known to sleepwalk or have any kind of sleeping disorders. He seemed to not know how to answer at first, but then he said yes, he does tend to sleepwalk sometimes. I wasn't buying it, though. Something was up. I decided to search Arlo's room for answers. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. I waited until Arlo was out of the apartment, then I crept into his room. I knew that I might not have much time, so I searched quickly, tearing through drawers and closets in search of anything that might explain Arlo's strange nightly behavior. And then, just as I was about to give up, I found it, a small, nondescript drawer hidden at the back of Arlo's closet. I pulled it open, and my blood ran cold at what I found inside. It was a collection of photographs, dozens of them, mostly featuring me asleep and one other guy who looked to be our age. They were taken from different angles and distances, some of them so close up that I could see the pores on my skin and individual strands of hair on my head. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized what I was looking at. Arlo had been secretly taking pictures of me while I slept, without my knowledge or consent. I couldn't believe it. I had been living with some kind of sick voyeur. He had been violating my privacy and invading my personal space for who knows how long. I wanted to confront Arlo, to demand answers, but I was afraid of what he might do, afraid of what he might say, afraid of what might happen if I confronted him alone. So I took a picture of the contents of the drawer and then took a handful of the photos as evidence to use against Arlo. I packed my things, and the next day, I showed the photos to the department in charge of student housing accommodations, and they told me to let them take the appropriate action. I was lucky and got assigned to a different apartment with a normal person who needed a roommate. I never spoke to Arlo again. Even now, years later, I still can't shake the memory of those chilling photographs and Arlo's whispering and creeping around at night. I never found out who the other guy in the photos was. It was definitely his old roommate, but I was never able to find his name. But who knows, maybe he also found out. The woman in the wedding dress. I'm a 25-year-old female with a 15-year-old brother and have lived in Queens, New York my whole life. 10 years ago, for those too lazy to do math, I was 15 and my brother was 5. I decided to take my brother to a massive street fair on a main street that stretched very far. The street was shut down. There were some scattered officers of the law, and everything else was street vendors and some awesomely shitty little carnival rides for kids. A group of my friends joined us. In total, there were 10 of us. After having a fun-filled day and introducing my brother to the deep-fried goodness of Zeppels and whatnot, we went to a pizzeria right by the fair. The place wasn't wide but was long. The booths that lined the wall on the right sat 3 people on each side. Then there was a narrow aisle and booths that sat 2 people on each side on the right. Being a half-decent big sister, I had my brother in the 6-seater booth in between me and a friend. This is where things start to get kind of creepy. In walks a man and woman who genuinely looked like they did way too many drugs. They were probably in their late 50s and early 60s. We wouldn't have noticed them if it wasn't for the fact that the woman was wearing a wedding dress, long sleeves, puffy at the shoulders, and long but sort of form-fitting in a way. This dress, however, must have once been white but was now yellowed with age and very dirty. She sat with the man parallel to our booth, our other friends sitting behind them, and a young couple with their 3 to 4-year-old daughter in front. The woman looked around, spotted my brother, and began to talk to him. "You're adorable. How'd you like to come home with me?" My brother has always been a bright kid and ignored her, eating his pizza. "Come on, little boy, you don't want to be around these teens." I nicely turned my face to the lady and asked her politely to leave us alone. She stood up and came to our table, trying to reach over to touch my brother. My friend stood up and blocked her. She went and sat down and started harassing the young couple and their daughter. After about 10 minutes, my brother announced he had to go to the bathroom. When my brother stood up and headed for the bathroom, 5 steps away, the woman asked him if he'd like her to help. At this point, I told her to get lost and leave my brother alone. She tried to push past me and rush to my brother in the bathroom, but another friend was standing in front of the door, basically guarding him. She cursed me out and sat down. As soon as he came out, I picked him up and carried him out. She tried to grab him from me, but there were 10 of us and 1 of her. We went to the nearest officer and told him what was up, and he ran to the pizzeria. Come to find out, she actually abducted a kid from the fair, but when the child started screaming bloody murder, she put him down and ran. Ever since I was a kid, I loved carnivals. The lights, the games, the unpredictable joy of it all. I know lots of people find them weird and childish, but not me. Growing up in a small town in Indiana, it's not like there was a whole bunch to do. So whenever the carnivals would roll through town, you best believe I was spending as much time there as I possibly could. It's been over 20 years, and I still enjoy the atmosphere of a local carnival. Despite what I'm about to tell you, I think my love for carnivals is something I'll never lose. I was like 9 or 10 when this happened, and I was a kind of nerdy kid growing up. In the days leading up to the spring carnival, I found myself in the library reading up on whatever I found interesting at the time. For whatever reason, I wound up in the history section. I remember the books being literally caked in layers of dust. That's how long it had been since they were even touched. I was flipping through a book on the history of our town when a small, faded slip of paper fell out from between the pages. Confused, I leaned down to pick it up. To my pleasant surprise, it was a ticket for our local spring carnival, dated over 15 years ago. The odds of something like that happening had to be extremely low. I was ecstatic. This ticket would make a great addition to my miscellaneous collection back home. What was even cooler, though, was the fact that the date on the ticket was just 2 days away, when the carnival would certainly be in town. As I predicted, the carnival cruised into town the next morning, so I figured, why not use the old ticket just for laughs, to see what the booth attendant would say. I wanted to get it punched anyway. The next evening, I headed to the carnival with the ticket safely tucked away in my pocket. As I approached the entrance, the carnival seemed just as lively as ever, the air filled with the scent of cotton candy and popcorn. I pulled out the ticket at the gate, handing it over to the guy at the booth. His face changed the moment he saw it. He went pale, his eyes widening slightly before he masked his reaction with a forced smile. It was honestly a little creepy. Enjoy your evening," he stammered, handing me back the ticket without punching it. I was so weirded out by his reaction that I forgot to ask him to punch it. I shrugged it off, though, thinking maybe he was just new and confused about the old design of the ticket. I wandered around, played some games, and enjoyed a funnel cake. The night was perfect, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I felt eyes on me, observing. Maybe it was just paranoia. I tried to ignore it at first, but I kept noticing the carnival employees giving me weird looks. After a while, I got fed up and decided to ask one of the older game operators about it. I found a kindly-looking elderly man running the ring toss booth. I showed him the ticket, and unlike the booth guy, he didn't even try to hide his shock. He glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Young man, where did you get this?" he asked. After telling him where I found it, I started feeling uneasy about the whole situation. Maybe I should have just kept the ticket at home. "You found something you weren't meant to find," the old man started, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This ticket, it's part of a story that the folks around here don't talk about much. About 15 years ago, something terrible happened during the carnival right here in this town." He paused as if weighing whether to continue. There was a young worker, name of Win, nice kid, everybody liked him. He was responsible for one of the rides. I can't remember which. One night, he just disappeared, vanished without a trace. The police found his wallet, but there was nothing in it except a ticket that looked an awful lot like this one, he said, gesturing towards my hands. The atmosphere around us seemed to drop a few degrees. He continued, they searched everywhere, even drained the local pond, but no sign of him. After that, strange things started happening every time the carnival stopped here, accidents, things going missing, odd sightings. People said it was when trying to come back, or something worse that took him. I could feel a chill running down my spine, but a part of me was skeptical. And you believe that? I asked. The old man shrugged. I've seen enough to keep an open mind. But the point is, the ticket you found might stir things up. It's best you get rid of it. Leave it here. He then motioned for me to give it to him, but I was reluctant. I looked down at it, reading it over again as if there was some kind of secret I was missing. How could a ticket be the cause of all that? I questioned, still not fully buying it. The look in his eye got darker, his tone switched almost as if he were angry. Give it here, he told me, almost in a growl. I considered it but concluded that some stupid story wasn't worth giving up such a cool souvenir. I told him no, and he actually sprung up with a quickness that startled me. He reached for the ticket, his fingers grazing my hand. I jerked back instinctively, clutching the ticket tighter. The old man's expression morphed into something desperate, almost predatory. You don't understand, he hissed, his eyes darting around as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. I backed away towards the tense exit, my heart pounding. I think I should go, I stammered, turning to lose myself in the crowd. Behind me, I could hear his calls, a mix of pleading and warning. I didn't care what he was saying though. I let the bustling crowd around me drown his voice out. My mind was racing, not even about the ticket, but more so his aggressive reaction. The joy of the carnival had been spoiled. I left earlier than planned, the ticket burning a hole in my pocket. Over the next few days, my luck seemed to turn sharply. I missed catching the school bus, scraped my knee pretty bad in a bike accident, and worst of all, my best friend accused me of stealing his favorite baseball card, something I would never do. Things got worse than that, though. I remember coming home one night to my mother in tears after losing her job. My brother broke his leg skateboarding the next week, and our beloved family pet, Bean, also passed away a few days after that. It was like a dark cloud had settled over me since that night at the carnival. I couldn't help but remember the old man's warning about the ticket stirring things up. It seemed ridiculous, but then again, so was the string of bad luck that followed me. My dad laughed when I told him about my theory. He told me that there was no such thing as ghosts and that I shouldn't be so superstitious. One rainy afternoon after school, after a particularly tough day where I had forgotten my lunch and had to go hungry, I pulled the ticket out. I stared at it, this small piece of paper that had brought nothing but trouble. Feeling a mix of anger and fear, I decided I had had enough. I grabbed my raincoat and boots and trudged out to the creek that ran behind our house. My heart felt like it was pounding out of my chest as the rain soaked through my hair. Standing at the creek's edge, I took one last look at the ticket before tearing it into tiny pieces and watching them get swept up by the current. It's just a piece of paper, I thought. Things started to look up after that. My friend found his baseball card and apologized to me, and we became friends again. I didn't miss the bus a single time that school year. My mom got a better job in the next couple of days. Whether it was all a coincidence or that ticket really was cursed, I couldn't say, but one thing was for sure, I learned to be more careful about what I picked up and brought home. I don't believe in the supernatural, even after all this stuff happened to me. My parents liked telling me that I imagined everything because I was so young. It's still hard to fully explain it, but I've long since accepted it as one of those weird coincidences that you just can't explain. This is a story I'm not proud of, mostly for my naivety. When I was in middle school and early high school, I didn't know how to talk to girls at all at school, but that's a lot of boys in middle school. I wasn't shy in general. I had friends and did normal things an 8th grader would do. I just had never kissed a girl or anything. Some of my friends at the time claimed they had already gone further than that with girls, and I was starting to feel pressure. But I was still having trouble approaching girls in that way. The mentality went from boys making fun of girls to suddenly liking them in a matter of like a year. I was a pretty big gamer in middle school and early high school. This was when I was in 8th grade. I was like 13. My voice was still probably a bit prepubescent sounding. It was 2009. I played a lot of console games and computer MMORPG games. My favorite console games at the time were GTA 4 and Call of Duty, and my favorite computer game was this MMORPG called Ganu. It was this online game where you would level up by killing monsters, and the more you leveled up, the higher level monsters and hunting grounds you'd be able to tackle. The online community in this game was very active, and there were tons of players. My older brother used to play it a little bit too. I played it more for sure though. I was in a guild and town and everything. I don't remember how it happened, but I befriended this female player who was a higher level than me. Her username was Pokemon. Anytime I'd sign in and she was on, she'd message me and vice versa. We would join parties together, which meant we'd share EXP on whatever monsters we killed, and we just chatted for hours. She knew a lot about me, including my age and my town and some personal family details she would open up to me too. Eventually, she told me her name was Karina. It was weird feeling such a connection with a girl when really, I knew nothing about her appearance or her voice. It truly was like having a pen pal, but better. It was interesting enough that we both lived in Texas state. She lived about an hour from me. After a few weeks, or maybe even a month, we started talking about maybe meeting one day. To do this, though, we'd have to exchange numbers. At the time, I didn't actually have a cell phone yet. I only had an iPod Touch. However, I was able to download a texting app that allowed me to send messages to people with cell phones. Through this app, I was able to send her a picture of myself. It was definitely this cringy 8th grade boy selfie of me trying to look good looking. She called me cute, and then she sent back a picture of herself. She looked a couple of years older than me, like 15, which was the age she told me she was. Based on the picture, I found her very attractive. This was around the time our messages became more flirtatious and romantic. But we were both minors, so neither of us could just drive an hour away. However, she apparently had a solution for this. She told me her sister had friends that lived around me, and she could probably get a ride to me. This was exciting news for my little 13-year-old self. I wanted to wait for a day and night when my parents wouldn't be home, so I'd have the house to myself. This was about a week later, I believe. My parents were going to the Hamptons for the whole weekend, so it would just be my brother and me home. My brother was 18, so I asked him to please just go out for the night with friends so that I could be alone with Karina. I gave Karina my address and told her to come that Saturday whenever she wanted. She said she'd be coming a little later, like at night. She didn't give me an exact time. At that point, we still had never spoken on the phone. I still hadn't heard her voice. I was so nervous all day that I couldn't even play video games. I was busy cleaning my room, making things look cool, fixing my appearance, and even rehearsing things to say in the initial moments of meeting. Then I got a message from Karina saying she's here. I sprang up and ran to the front door. I looked through the peephole and didn't see anyone. She then said, "You can come out to the front door." I opened the door and stepped onto the front porch. I looked around, and the street was dark and quiet, no cars, no people. I went back inside and shut the door. I messaged her back saying, "I don't see you." She replied, "Oh, I must have the wrong house. Give me a minute." That was a bit weird. I locked the door and sat on the living room couch, nervously waiting and playing games on my iPod. I got a message from her again. She said she's here and to come outside. I replied, "Ring the bell so I know you're at the right house." Then the doorbell rang. My nerves really set in. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and didn't see anyone. I said, "Karina." Through the peephole, I saw a hand reach towards the door and knock. I said, "Karina," again as I kept looking through the peephole. Everything felt like it instantly crumbled on top of me as this bald, creepy-looking short guy stepped in front of the peephole and then said through the door, "Hey, it's Pokemon. I want to talk." I ran away from the door with my hands over my mouth, truly speechless. The person I'd been talking to all this time was a creepy grown man. I was disgusted and scared. I went to call my brother's cell phone, he didn't pick up. The doorbell kept ringing. I went to my bedroom and locked myself in. I held the house phone in my grasp, considering calling my parents but too embarrassed to do so. My room was the only other room in the house with the lights on. I have a big window in my room that overlooks the whole side yard of our corner house. I turned off my lamp and slightly kinked the blind just a crack, and I saw that guy on the other side trying to look in. He started to knock on the window and said through the closed window how much of a connection we clearly have and that we could at least be friends. I responded with nothing. I called my brother again, and he picked up this time. I said, "Please come home right now." The Karina person was a grown man the entire time, and he's at my window right now. My brother's always been pretty big, even as a teenager. I'd feel safer with him being here. He said he was coming home with his friends right now. We stayed on the phone so I could tell him if anything happened. I ran to my parents' bedroom upstairs and hid there. The man was blowing up my message app, saying he would like to talk and that there was a reason he had to lie about who he was. When my brother got home, he told me he saw the guy outside. My brother and his 3 friends confronted the creepy short man outside. I went outside then to watch the 4 of them intimidate the man, calling him a sicko. The man's defense was that he was concerned for my well-being, inviting strangers from online over, and that this was supposed to be a learning lesson. I refuted this claim by asking him why he would say that we could be good friends at my window when my brother and his friends started pushing the man. He started quickly walking to his car. My brother kicked the guy's tail light while one of his friends threw a rock at his window. He sped off down the road, never to be seen again. This was humiliating and disturbing, but at the same time, I was really grateful for my brother and his friends coming to my aid. They potentially saved me from a seriously sick creep breaking into the house. It's still painful and uncomfortable realizing all that time I spent opening up to who I thought was a girl my own age on a game was some creepy grown man with a different agenda. One of my favorite hobbies has always been playing video games. When I was younger, I used to do a lot of console gaming, but in recent years, I've done most of my gaming on the PC. So, I have a setup in my bedroom in the apartment that I currently live in. It's in one corner of the room opposite my bed. Several weeks ago, I was having a gaming night with a friend. We both logged on at probably a little after 8 p.m. I was at my apartment, and he was at his apartment, so we were just gaming online. We were going to go until we got tired. I live alone in my small one-bedroom apartment, which is kind of old and on the first floor of the building. After playing online for several hours, neither of us were tired yet. At this point, I'm guessing it was around 11 p.m. That's when I thought I heard a knocking at my window behind me. I had my headset on, which is mostly noise canceling, so I couldn't hear that well, but I looked back to the window. It's probably like 15 feet from my desk and the chair I was sitting in. When I looked, I thought I saw what appeared to be a man moving away from the window. The window looks out to a small grassy area behind the apartments. Then there's a fence between the next property and a little woods before another apartment complex. In all my time living here, I had never really seen anybody out walking back there or anything, so this was kind of strange and also suspicious. The total time that I saw the guy was less than a second, though he was already moving away when I turned around and looked. I told my friend I would be back in a minute, and then I got up. I then walked over to the window and looked out of it. It was pretty dark in the little space back there, but I could see a little bit. However, I did not notice anyone there. I then left my bedroom and walked out to the kitchen, which also had a window looking out to that same general area. This had a broader view, but I still didn't see anyone. I figured that the guy was gone. This situation was kind of weird, especially with it being late at night. My only good explanation that I could think of was that possibly the man accidentally went to the wrong apartment window. He could have been trying to get somebody else's attention who he knew. I then went back to my gaming chair and sat down. I told my friend about what had happened. We chatted about it for a while and decided that it probably wasn't a big deal. However, probably 30 minutes after this or so, I remember looking back to the window. My headset was still on, so I don't remember if I heard anything or if I was just randomly turning around. When I did, though, I saw a man standing at the window. He was looking in. Because of it being dark outside, I did not really see any details of the man's face or what he looked like. Instinctively, I quickly got up from my chair. When I did, the man moved out of sight from the window. I then walked out of my bedroom into my small hallway with just a bathroom and a closet. Then to the right is the living room. It just felt safer to be away from that window. Moments later, before I returned to my bedroom or really did anything, I heard a noise. I was standing in the hallway, and there were a few sort of loud banging noises from my bedroom window. It seemed like possibly the man was going to try to break in. I heard several more loud bangs on the window, and I worried that it would break. I walked over to my door and left my apartment, going into the hallway. Then I called the police. I told them about what happened and said that I thought a man was breaking in. While I waited for the police, I went to the lobby of the apartment building near the front. I felt much better being away from my unit. The police got there minutes later. They searched my apartment and behind it. When I returned to my place, I saw that my window was actually broken and the man had gotten in. Several things were messed up. I was also missing several items. However, the man was able to escape before the police got there. At the end of the day, I was just glad that I left before he broke in. With the window being broken, I went and stayed at a friend's house for the night. The window got repaired the next day. Though I'm mad about having several of my things stolen, it was not even $100 worth of stuff. I am, however, sort of concerned that something like this will happen again. I still live in the same apartment, but luckily, nothing like this has happened since. When I was 18, I was very immature and naive. I was kind of a jerk when I was on the road, honking whenever I got impatient, borderline cutting people off. Looking back now, it was very stupid. If I ever have kids, I'll be that much more strict with them as far as their driving. That being said, I did drive a lot for someone my age. I went away to school 5 hours away from home. No matter what day of the week, traffic always gets atrocious the closer I get to home. So during breaks, I'll drive home at night to avoid this. What goes from a 4 to 5 hour drive down to a 3-hour drive? It was the beginning of winter break as the fall semester just ended. All my friends left for home on the same day. I just waited till later on in the night to head out because there's nothing I hate more than traffic. I used to drive a Mazda 3 that I would beat the ever-living crap out of, and admittedly, I used to be known for driving my car to a near-empty tank consistently. People would comment on it whenever they'd be in the car with me, and I'd always assure them that the car would still have at least 30 miles to go even after the needle would hit E. I found out the night I was driving home from school that I was wrong. I was only like an hour into my drive on the interstate. The needle was on E, and I was pushing my luck waiting for a gas station sign instead of looking up the nearest one on the map. The car started making these weird sounds suddenly and jolting, and that's when I realized I may have actually run the tank empty this time. I got off the first exit ramp and hoped it would lead right to a gas station. This exit was dark though, with no street lights, and there were just woods on either side. I was scared to slow down and lose my speed because I didn't know if I'd have enough gas to find a gas station. I blew through the stop sign at the end of the ramp and made a sharp left turn on the intersecting road, which was another dark road surrounded by woods. I was screwed. The car eventually came to a stop, and the engine died. Things only got worse when I took out my phone and saw I had no bars. I have T-Mobile, which is the worst possible reception anywhere far from a major city. I tried calling 911 because I was stupid and thought that 911 works even without reception. Of course, it didn't. I was terrified because I didn't know what to do. I turned on my hazard lights and just waited for someone to pass by. It was a long time before I saw headlights approaching. When I did, I flashed my headlights at them, and they passed me, made a U-turn, then pulled up on the grass behind me. I didn't know who was getting out of that car, though, and I was an 18-year-old defenseless girl. I just cracked the window down a little bit as this man approached my car. I told him I needed help. I ran out of gas. He offered to give me a ride to the nearest gas station. He was this bald guy with glasses on. He kind of looked trustworthy. I had no other apparent options but to accept his offer. I got out of the car and followed him to his car, making sure to lock my doors first. His car was a black Honda, year probably a 2010. It smelled funky in his car. I couldn't pin what the smell could be, though. He banged another U-turn and started driving in the direction he was driving before. He made conversation with me, asking where I was from and basic questions. I was honest with him that I was driving home from school. He said he lived in the area and that they don't get too many out-of-towners getting off the interstate for this quiet little town. The route we were taking lacked any buildings anywhere. It was just woods everywhere. I asked if he knew of any gas stations, and he said yeah, just a ways up the road. I started hearing bumping and thumping coming from the back of the vehicle. It sounded like the trunk. At first, I thought it was maybe just bumps in the road or a loose object in the trunk. He seemed to keep talking like he wouldn't stop. Finally, we got to a sort of town-looking area. There were some lights and buildings at last, a diner, and a few small houses. There was a red light at the first intersection since I got in his car. We came to a stop, and for the first time, there was silence. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of someone screaming in the trunk, followed by thumps and bangs. I looked at the man, who looked at me. In a split second, I unbuckled my seatbelt, opened the door, and ran while at the same time, he tried grabbing me and pulling me back into the car. I heard him get out as well, but instead of chasing me, he ran to close his passenger side door. Then I heard him floor it down the street. I ran into the diner and asked for help, making a scene. I used their phone to call 911. I waited there, and it became this whole huge thing with multiple police showing up to the diner to take a report. Given the gravity of the report that I was making, that I heard someone in the trunk of the car, they had to get every last detail from me about the man's car, his appearance, and where he picked me up. I was also given a ride back to my car so that they could also include the pickup location in the report. They also helped me get a hold of AAA, which eventually would come to my location to fill my car with gas. This was overall the scariest experience of my life. I was shaken to the core the whole rest of the ride home. I hope they found that man. I hope whoever was in that trunk is still alive today. For all I know, that man could have been bringing me to his house or somewhere else, and I was just lucky I had a chance to get out at that red light. Our first story takes place under the unforgiving glare of the desert sun. Miles and miles of sand stretch in every direction, baking under the intense heat. Imagine finding yourself stranded in this desolate landscape, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the dunes. This is the nightmare that became a reality for one unfortunate traveler. He had been driving for hours, the monotony of the road lulling him into a false sense of security. He had ignored the gas gauge, its needle dipping dangerously low, too focused on reaching his destination. Then it happened. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died, leaving him in stunned silence. He was stranded miles from civilization, the nearest town nothing more than a dot on a map he'd hastily consulted hours ago. Panic began to set in, a cold dread creeping up his spine as the gravity of the situation sunk in. The sun beat down relentlessly, the heat radiating off the sand making the air shimmer. He had a meager supply of water, a granola bar, and the clothes on his back. Hope, it seemed, was in short supply. Days turned into a desperate struggle for survival. The relentless sun sapped his energy, the scorching sand burned his skin. He rationed his water, each sip a precious commodity, but dehydration was a constant threat. The vastness of the desert mocked him, a desolate wasteland stretching endlessly towards the horizon. As darkness fell, the desert transformed into a chilling tableau. Gone was the oppressive heat, replaced by a bone-chilling cold that cut through his thin clothing. The silence was broken only by the howl of the wind, a mournful sound that echoed his growing despair. He huddled in his car, a meager shelter against the elements, with fear as his only companion. Days turned into nights, each one blurring into the next, a terrifying cycle of scorching days and freezing nights. His hope dwindled with each passing hour, replaced by a gnawing fear that he wouldn't make it out alive. He had become a prisoner of the desert, trapped in a desolate wasteland with no escape. One day, while stumbling through the sand, his vision blurred from dehydration, he spotted something in the distance. Was it a mirage, a cruel trick of his exhausted mind? As he stumbled closer, his heart pounding in his chest, he realized with a surge of hope that it was a road, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desolate landscape. With renewed determination, he dragged his weary body towards the road, each step a victory against the relentless grip of the desert. As he finally reached the roadside, he collapsed, his body spent, his spirit broken but not extinguished. He had escaped the clutches of the desert, a survivor of a terrifying ordeal. His story serves as a chilling reminder of the unforgiving nature of the desert, a place where running out of gas can be a matter of life and death. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the will to survive, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Our final story takes us to a desolate stretch of highway, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through a barren landscape. This is not a road frequented by travelers. The few gas stations that dotted its length had long since been abandoned, their pumps dry and their windows boarded up like hollow eyes staring out at the emptiness. A young couple, eager for a weekend getaway, found themselves stranded on this forgotten highway. Their car sputtered its last as the gas gauge hit empty. They had ignored the warning signs, the lack of other cars, the eerie silence that hung heavy in the air, too caught up in their own excitement to heed these signs. Now, they were stranded. The sun beat down on the cracked asphalt, the air thick with the smell of dust and despair. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. They were alone, utterly alone, in a place that felt forgotten by time. They decided to walk, hoping to find help, a glimmer of hope in this desolate landscape. Mile after mile, they walked, the sun beating down on them relentlessly. Their throats were parched, their energy draining with each step. The highway stretched out before them, an endless ribbon of asphalt leading nowhere. As they walked, they noticed something strange, cars abandoned on the roadside, seemingly frozen in time. Some were old and rusted, others surprisingly new, their paint still gleaming under the harsh sun. Each car was eerily empty, their interiors undisturbed, as if their occupants had vanished into thin air. Fear, primal and instinctive, began to creep into their hearts. The silence of the highway was no longer just unnerving, it was oppressive, heavy with an unseen menace. They quickened their pace, their eyes darting nervously at the abandoned vehicles, their minds conjuring up terrifying scenarios. As dusk approached, casting long eerie shadows across the highway, they stumbled upon a small town. Relief washed over them, a beacon of civilization in this desolate wasteland. But as they approached, their relief turned to horror. The town was deserted, buildings stood empty, their windows dark and lifeless. The streets were eerily silent, not a single soul in sight. It was as if the entire town had simply vanished, leaving behind an unsettling silence that spoke volumes. They pressed on, desperation fueling their steps, their senses on high alert and their hearts pounding in their chests. The town was like a ghost town, frozen in time, its silence amplifying their growing fear. As darkness fell, they came to a crossroads. In the fading light, they saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. Relief flooded them, a glimmer of hope in this desolate landscape. They called out, but the figure remained motionless, its back to them. As they drew closer, their hearts sank. The figure was a scarecrow, its straw-stuffed body dressed in tattered clothing, its painted face twisted into a grotesque grin. It was a cruel joke, a symbol of their isolation and despair. They collapsed on the roadside, their bodies spent, their spirits broken. They were trapped in a nightmare, a desolate highway populated by abandoned cars and ghost towns. Their hope, once a flickering flame, now threatened to be extinguished by overwhelming despair. Looks like there's a storm approaching. I glanced out the window of the car and looked behind us as my fiancée, Kiva, came out of the shop with a bag of snacks for our trip. The sky looked gray just a few feet behind us down the road. I heard low rumbling as Kiva opened the driver's side door and got in. "Do you think the roads will get bad?" I asked her. She glanced behind us for a few seconds before turning on the engine. The 80s station we had been listening to on our road trip turned on, and the music filled the car as Kiva pulled out of the gas station parking lot. "We can always pull over if they do," she replied. "Don't you think we should fill up on gas soon?" I asked. "I think we should be fine for now." I glanced over at the dashboard. "There's a quarter of a tank left," I noted. "Babe, it's fine. Trust me. You worry too much. Besides, that's more than a quarter." I sighed as I tried not to let it bug me. I hated getting lower than half a tank in my own car. It stressed me out to no end. We pulled out onto the road, and I grabbed my phone. As I opened the weather app, I looked at the forecast for the day, sunny with a high of 95. That couldn't be right. I made sure that I had cell service before opening the app again, thinking that maybe it would refresh. It didn't, and the forecast still said the same. "Huh," I said. "That's weird." "What's weird?" Kiva asked. I looked in the side mirror at the darkening skies behind me. The clouds were catching up to us quickly. "Melanie," I glanced back at Kiva. "The weather app says it's supposed to be sunny today. Maybe the app is down." "Yeah, maybe," I replied. We continued down the road and stopped at a red light. I shifted in my seat so I could look behind us at the approaching storm. I could see the dark clouds moving across the sky, heading directly towards us. I turned back to face the road ahead of us when suddenly the sound of thunder boomed across the sky. I jumped as it was followed by a flash of lightning. All of a sudden, a scream erupted behind us. "What was that?" Kiva asked. Oh my God, what the," someone yelled. The people in the cars around us began to roll down their windows to get a better view of whatever was happening. Kiva shifted the car into park and undid her seatbelt as she opened the door and stepped out of the car. I followed, walking between the traffic. As I followed Kiva, there was a crowd forming a few feet away where an old woman was crying and shouting nonsense. I looked up at the sky again and noticed that the gray clouds were even closer now, and I couldn't see anything in the distance anymore. I glanced back towards the car and then up at the traffic light, which was now green. No one was driving off yet, though, as everyone had gotten out of their cars to investigate. Suddenly, the loud sound of crushing metal caught my attention. As I looked towards the sound, a white pickup truck had been almost completely crushed. I squinted to get a closer look and noticed that there seemed to have been a person inside the truck when it was flattened, and their blood and insides covered the windshield. I looked away quickly as I took deep breaths, trying not to gag. Other people had started to walk toward the crushed truck, and some were gagging and backing up as they realized what they were seeing. "What did?" someone screamed again. The sound of crushing metal was heard, and a second car had been crushed. This time, it had only been the hood of the car that had been crushed, and the driver ran out to look at the damage. "Get back in your cars now," someone screamed. I locked eyes with Kiva, and we ran to the car, getting in and slamming the doors shut. As Kiva shifted back into drive and managed to pull in between the cars and speed through the intersection, I kept looking behind us as the clouds continued to approach. I could see raindrops now. Some of the people had made it away just in time, and others got caught in the rain. The sound of multiple cars being crushed filled the street as Kiva sped down the road. Luckily for us, it was mainly empty. I held on to the armrest as Kiva kept speeding. "Is that the rain doing that?" I asked, glancing back again. "I think so," Kiva muttered. She continued to drive, hyper-focused on the road. I glanced over at the speedometer. She was going almost 90. I looked over at the side of the road as we passed a speed limit sign but said nothing. I looked back at the approaching storm. The rain had picked up excessively, and all of the trees and stop lights had been crushed. They were now crumpled up in the middle of the road, blocking anyone else from escaping the storm. As I glanced down in the rearview mirror, I noticed that most of the road was gone too. There were giant holes everywhere, making it impossible to drive on. My body flung forward as Kiva hit the brakes. All of a sudden, the sound of the screeching brakes and the tires on the road filled my ears as she tried to stop the car. She exclaimed, and the car finally came to a stop. I looked over at her. "Why are you stopping?" She motioned towards the road where there was a giant tree branch blocking the way. "Help me move it, hurry." I jumped out of the car and helped her push the branch out of the way. As we pushed, I couldn't help but glance toward the storm, which was still rapidly approaching. The rain was also picking up, and it seemed like we were right, the rain was to blame. I used all my strength to push on the branch as Kiva pulled, and we finally got it out of the way. We ran back to the car and I glanced back to see the rain approaching. As the first drop of rain landed on the roof of a small convenience store on the side of the road, it all crumbled to the ground. I slid into the seat of the car. "What do you think happens if it lands on someone?" I asked. Kiva turned to look at me. She opened her mouth to speak but didn't get to, as she glanced out one of the back windows. I followed her gaze and saw a man walking down the side of the road. In a split second, the rain caught up. 1 second he was there, and the next second, there was a splatter of blood and human insides on the sidewalk. "I guess that's your answer," Kiva said as she started driving again. I turned around in my seat to keep an eye on the storm. It seemed that the winds had started to pick up, and I could hear them whistling as Kiva continued to drive. "It's getting faster," I replied. She said nothing, but I could feel the speed of the car picking up. We'd been on the road for about half an hour now, and the storm seemed to consistently pick up speed with each second that passed. I couldn't stop myself from looking back at the approaching storm and all of the damage that the rain had done. We'd seen it crush a few more people as it passed through. I don't know how long this storm is going to last or how far out it's going to travel, I thought. But I'm hoping that I can at least warn a few people. Maybe you can make a plan to outrun it. We're going to run out of gas soon, and there's no way that we would have enough time to stop and fill up on gas without the storm catching up to us and crushing our car, and then us. I don't know what we're going to do. We haven't even passed another car that we could potentially steal to try to outrun the storm. I don't know if anyone will even see this or how this will even help, but if you start to see the storm approaching, start running. This happened during the summer before my sophomore year in college. At that time, I was doing a lot of research for a place I could live during the coming school year that was close to campus. I found multiple good-looking apartments, but all of them were way out of my budget. I quickly figured out that if I wanted to live close to campus, I would need a roommate that could help pay each month's rent. I posted an ad on Craigslist explaining my situation, hoping someone would be interested. Not even an hour after I posted the ad, I got a response. Apparently, it was some older lady in her 70s. I was kind of expecting it to be another student from my university, but I figured it didn't really matter. As long as they were willing to pay half of the rent, I didn't really care. Plus, I didn't get any further responses in the next week, so I took the one opportunity one was given. Fast forward to the start of the school semester, and the two of us moved in. She introduced herself as Wilfred. She was short and had white hair. Although a little quiet, she seemed nice. I figured we'd get along fine, so I wasn't too worried about the coming months. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We had the occasional small talk conversation when we were both in the kitchen, but that was about it. For the most part, she would spend all her time in her bedroom. Occasionally, while I was watching TV in the living room at night, I would hear this high-pitched giggling coming through the walls. The first few times it happened, I just assumed she was on her phone or something. But then I realized I never actually heard her talking. It was just her giggling. I couldn't imagine what she was doing. Over time, things just kept getting weirder. For example, she would start coming out of her room for no other purpose than to watch me. She would stand in the kitchen or hallway just looking at me while I watched TV or made myself dinner. Needless to say, I was getting more and more uncomfortable around her. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. to the sound of slight knocking on my bedroom door. Not knocking like trying to get my attention, but slow, soft, and barely audible knocking. I yelled out Wilfred's name, and right as I did, the knocking stopped. I knew it was her because shortly after, I heard her same giggling followed by footsteps walking back to her room. I'd be lying if I said this didn't freak me out. I didn't have a lock on my door, so nothing was stopping her from coming into my room while I was sleeping. I didn't sleep at all the rest of that night. I had planned on confronting her about this situation the next day, but she never left her room once. Come night again, I decided to move my desk in front of my door as a makeshift barricade because, again, I didn't have a lock on my door and I did not feel comfortable having nothing stopping her from entering my room. 3 hours later, I woke up to the sound of my desk being hit by my door from someone attempting to open it. It was Wilfred. I could see her eye peeking through the crack of the slightly open door. Before I could even say anything, she started screaming and banging on my door. My desk started to give way, so I got out of bed and held the door closed myself. The screaming and banging went on for 2 more minutes. Once it finally stopped, I got up and called the police. When they arrived, I opened the door to my bedroom and my heart dropped. Every single one of the knives from our kitchen had been stabbed into the door. I was absolutely horrified, but I tried to compose myself. I briefly explained the situation to the 2 officers that arrived. I also told them which room Wilfred was in. She would provide a struggle in being detained, but they would ultimately take her away. The next month, I moved to another apartment, this time with some actual students from my university. I still don't understand what made Wilfred do what she did. My best guess is she had some severe untreated condition she wasn't on medication for, but then again, maybe not. Maybe she seriously intended to use those knives on me in my sleep. But because I took the precaution of pushing my desk in front of my door, I luckily didn't have to find out. My 2 kids, Audrey and Radley, are twins. They're 6 years old. A year ago, we were living at our old house, but something happened that led to us moving. It's a long, awful story. I lived in my old house for 4 years. My wife Louisa and I got married while I was living there, and we had our kids there too. The neighborhood was slowly changing, and not for the better, but even still, we originally planned on staying in that house for the foreseeable future until this happened. We were a corner house, and the house behind us on the intersecting road was covered by a bunch of tall trees and bushes, so we hardly ever saw those neighbors. Our neighbor on the right, however, his name was Farley, had just moved there less than a year ago. At the time, I had only ever spoken with him a couple of times. Both times I could hardly understand what he said because of his heavy accent, and he just overall didn't seem like the friendliest guy. Two of his windows overlooked our backyard. There wasn't much privacy, but whatever rooms the two windows were that overlooked the backyard, I had never seen the lights on in either of them. So I always assumed it was an unused guest room or something of that nature. One day in the summertime, Audrey and Radley were playing in the backyard in their blow-up pool and with their water guns while I was outside doing yard work. There came a certain point where I was walking towards the detached garage, and then I saw Farley next door at his window. For a second, only half a second after noticing him, did he turn and walk away from the window. It was slightly odd for sure, but I left it alone. Later that day, as the sun was going down, the kids went back outside to play again. It was a very hot day, so they went back in their blow-up pool while Louisa and I were in the kitchen as she was making dinner. Then the kids' laughter went quiet for a while, and suddenly Radley came inside and said there was a flashing light from the neighbor's window. I had to follow him into the backyard to ask him to show me what he was talking about. He pointed to one of Farley's upstairs windows that overlooked the backyard, and he said there was a white light that kept coming from that window. I immediately assumed the worst and asked the twins if it looked like a camera flash. They both said yes. I told them it was time to dry off and come inside. So I helped them dry themselves and then brought them in where I went to tell Louisa about this. She immediately assumed the worst, just like me. She said I should go next door and knock on Farley's door. So I did, but when I did, he never answered the door. His car was even in the driveway, so he had to be home. After a few attempts at knocking and ringing the bell, I gave up and went back to my house. I told Louisa he wasn't opening up, which made what the kids said seem even more credible. While we couldn't prove that the white light the kids were seeing was a camera flash, it sure did sound like it, and it was concerning to hear. Some time passed, maybe even weeks, before one night when Louisa and I were in the bedroom, we heard our side gate being quietly opened and closed outside. Louisa wanted me to go check outside, so I stepped out into the backyard and looked around. I had on all the lights as I searched. I found nothing and nobody, but I noticed the lights in Farley's backyard were on. I went over to look over the fence into his yard, and I nearly jumped out of my skin when he came up to the fence from the other side and asked if I needed something. I asked him if he'd seen or heard anyone sneaking through our yard. He said no. I took this time to also ask him bluntly if he had, by chance, been watching my kids, as they thought someone was at his window taking pictures of them playing in the pool. His reaction to this was a bit suspicious. He acted overly offended to my asking this, almost yelling at me for such an accusation. Again, without proof, I couldn't, nor did I want to, start issues with a neighbor. I apologized and went back inside. Louisa was not happy about this, saying he's full of it. The next incident didn't happen until another few weeks later. This time it was in the middle of the night when we were asleep. I woke up to Louisa shaking me in a panic. I looked around the room, confused at first, but then when I heard the kids screaming from their room, I exploded from the bed and ran downstairs to the kids' room. Radley was awake and crying, and I found out a few seconds later that his crying and screaming had awoken Audrey, who was crying and screaming in reaction to him. Radley said there was someone outside the window a second ago, and there was a camera flash from the window. I got goosebumps, but I also felt my blood begin to boil. All I could say was, "What did he look like?" He said he didn't see. I brought the kids up to our room to sleep in the bed with us. With the lights off, I peeked out our bedroom window to look across at Farley's unlit house next door. I looked at each window of his house, and I found him. He, just like me, was peeking out one of the upstairs windows in that same room that overlooks the backyard. I stormed outside next door and rang his doorbell like 15 times. He never opened his door. I did call the police just to make a report on Farley. That way, if any future reports were made about him from other people, maybe the police department would look into him. I never saw him again. Sometimes I'd sit out front, waiting to see him outside, but he'd clearly avoid coming outside when I'd be out there. Because of this, we ended up moving within a month to a new house in a different but nearby town, which has proven to be a better place to raise the kids anyway. My childhood was normal and nothing out of the ordinary. Two middle-class, hard-working parents just getting by in a nice city, and then of course, me and my little brother. He's 6 years younger than me, and he was at my grandma's house when this happened. My mom was at work, working a double shift, and my father was also working. He was a truck driver, so oftentimes he would spend weeks away from the house. My mom also worked a lot to cope with the fact that my father was always gone. I think it made us all a little bit sad sometimes, but really, our family was very close and we always had a great time together when we were able to finally hang out. Sometime during the night, it wasn't too late yet, but definitely starting to get dark. My mom wasn't going to be home for a few more hours, and I was getting pretty bored with nothing to do. I was pacing back and forth through the house, just trying to figure out how to cure my boredom. I sat down on the couch and began looking for something to watch on TV, but nothing was catching my eye. Shortly after, I went and grabbed my PS4 from my bedroom so I could play Madden football out in the living room since the TV was twice as big as mine. As I was hooking up my PlayStation, I felt something weird inside. As soon as I looked up, there was a face smothered in the window right in front of me, staring directly at me. I froze and screamed. Then the man also started screaming. He started yelling for help and to let him inside, just over and over. I had no idea who he was or what he was doing, but he was practically begging and screaming at the top of his lungs. I couldn't move a muscle because I was just so scared. Sounds weird, but I almost let him in despite me being that scared. I was just unsure of what to do. He was a big, scary man, but he appeared to be in danger. Thankfully, my mom pulled into the driveway as this was happening. I was so relieved to see her, but also terrified that the man might try to hurt her. He stopped like a deer in headlights, and my mom yelled at him to leave, and he did. Thankfully, my mom called the cops when she got inside. When they showed up, the man was sitting across the street on the curb in front of a foreclosed house. The cops found him there and asked him questions. He stuck with his story, though, and said that a group of men in ski masks tried to kidnap him and that they beat him senseless. For some reason, I just didn't believe that. The cop didn't really seem to either, to be honest, but there was nothing the officer could do technically. We later found out that the man was our new neighbor, and he had just bought that house that was foreclosed right across from us. It was a good thing that my mom showed up like an hour before I expected her to that night. That guy still lives next to my parents, and I lived there for a few more years after this incident. He never necessarily bothered us again after that, but man, he was a creeper. We had to live by his word and take what he said as the truth. Even though it seemed unlikely, we had no choice but to accept it. Nothing outlandish happened with him after this, but there were times I was very uncomfortable by his presence. He used to smile and wave at me whenever I walked past his house, and he always seemed to be outside watching when I got off the school bus. There were also times I heard him having full-on conversations with himself, and I swear I even saw him hitting himself in the head while doing so a few times. He liked to randomly scream in the middle of the night like bloody murder. There was definitely something wrong with him, so we always did our best to keep our distance. My dad really disliked him, probably even more than my mother and I. Violence really was not a thing in our neighborhood, and I mean that literally. So his story was just weird. The last thing I want to mention is when I saw his face the first time. He wasn't cut up or bleeding like he was when the police found him. I genuinely believe he did that to himself to make himself look like a victim. It sounds crazy, but I know there are people out there crazy enough to do that. My boyfriend and I used to live in a small house that we were renting at the time. We were young and it was our first place, so we needed something affordable. We found a place for just $700. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 900 square foot house. It was in a really rough part of town, but we thought if we minded our business, kept our noses down, and stayed alert, that we'd be fine. It was nothing fancy at all, but it was still more than what we needed. We both had jobs, only being paid $10 to $15 an hour, and we were both also full-time college students. So we were out of the house more than we were home, especially my boyfriend. He worked as a garbage man and got lots of overtime. He would get to work around 7 a.m. and sometimes wouldn't be home until 7:30 or 8 o'clock. Whereas I, on the other hand, worked at a salon for a new and upcoming small local business. I was paid under the table there, so it helped with taxes and the lack of hours I was working. My boyfriend, whose name is Arnold, by the way, took night classes for college. He was studying law but later changed to business after just a year. That's not really the point, but the point I'm trying to make is that he was hardly ever home, mostly to eat and sleep. Even on the weekends, he worked a part-time job for extra money. I would always have dinner ready for him every night so he could eat before class and so we could spend what little time we had together every night before he would have to leave at 9 o'clock for 4 hours. I would usually be sleeping by the time he got home. When Arnold returned home, I was nowhere to be found. Of course, he freaked out and filed a missing persons report after blowing up my phone and me not replying for over 30 minutes. It wasn't until 2 days later that Arnold ran into our neighbor while getting the mail, and for some reason, he thought that there was a possibility that he might know something. Arnold admitted that he didn't really think he did, but he was trying everything he could at first by asking anyone any kind of questions he could think of. He asked him when he saw me last and stuff like that. This is where things get much crazier. My boyfriend thought he was acting really weird, and way weirder than usual, so he called the cops on him. But since they didn't have any proof or probable cause, and they didn't have a warrant nor consent to search the house, it didn't go very far. Arnold had this very serious feeling inside that something was wrong with this guy and that he had something to do with me going missing. He literally snuck into our neighbor's house later that night after he saw him leave. The house was disgusting and was honestly as bad as some of the worst Hoarders episodes I've ever seen. He looked all around the house and was yelling for me in case I was in there. He had no clue if I really was, but I finally heard him yelling for me and I screamed as best as I could from downstairs with the duct tape covering my mouth. He didn't hear me yelling until he started to search downstairs for me. Yes, The man kidnapped me and did unspeakable things to me for days. Arnold got me out of there and we called the police. Of course, we lied a bit so Arnold didn't get charged with breaking and entering. We told police that Arnold heard me screaming down there and that he rushed in here to save me and that we called the police right away. We never had any issue with Arnold getting any charges, thankfully. I don't really like to talk about how he kidnapped me and how it all went down. It makes me too uncomfortable. I'll explain it briefly, though. While Arnold was gone that night and I was sleeping, the man broke in and managed to knock me out cold by beating me half to death and dragged me next door in the middle of the night without anyone noticing. This story is very real, and what happened to me is still something I live with and sticks with me to this very day. He used to stare at me like a creeper every day, and we always thought he was strange, but never did we think it would come to this. I'm pretty sure this is literally every woman's worst nightmare. What you're about to hear is something that will sound like it was straight from a horror movie, but it's absolutely true. Every summer, my friends and I go on a camping trip to a new location. It's a tradition we've had for years. One year, we chose a hiking trail in West Glacier, Montana. My friend Enda is a photographer, so he always likes to bring his camera equipment and get lots of nature shots. Our first day there, the three of us did a lot of hiking and exploring, taking in the sights and allowing Enda to get a lot of shots. That first night there, nothing was out of the ordinary. We had 2 tents. I was alone in mine while the other 2 shared theirs. The next day, we did some fishing at a nearby river and a few other things that aren't really that interesting to talk about, but that second night was where things got weird. The fire had just been put out, and we went to our respective tents. None of us had even fallen asleep yet when we started hearing sounds from out in the woods. It was very clearly a person's voice. It sounded like an older woman's voice. It kept getting louder and more clear every 10 seconds or so. I called over to my friend's tent right next to mine, asking if they heard that, and they called back saying yes, someone was out there. The voice got so close and so clear that we could hear her saying, "Hello." I was shaking in my socks. Maybe you might think we're bad people for not jumping to help an older woman who may have been stranded in the woods, but that just didn't seem right. Being in the middle of the woods at night hearing someone calling out, "Hello," is beyond terrifying. I heard footsteps approach the tent, then stop. The voice once again said, "Hello," but it was right outside the tent this time, and now that it was this close, it didn't sound like a woman anymore. It sounded like a man trying to sound like a woman, raising the pitch in his voice. The person outside my tent suddenly started shaking the tent aggressively, and I freaked out and screamed, "What do you want?" My friend shouted to go away to the person. The shaking then stopped as suddenly as it started, and I heard the footsteps quickly hurry away. I waited a few moments before unzipping my tent and grabbing my sleeping bag to go to my friend's tent. Even those brief 5 seconds outside the tent, I felt like I was going to be grabbed at any moment. I felt safer as I was in the tent with them and not alone anymore. None of us knew what to think, but we all 3 agreed it didn't sound like an actual woman. It sounded like some creepy man pretending to be one to get us to let our guards down. The question was why, though. Was he carrying a weapon? Either way, we didn't think it was safe to get up and leave now. We agreed to leave first thing in the morning, as soon as the sun would begin to rise. We also agreed that someone would need to stay awake at all times to keep watch, so we agreed to take turns sleeping. My friend Gabriel took the first shift while Enda and I tried to sleep, which was hard to do after what just happened, especially when we'd keep thinking we were hearing footsteps surrounding the tent. Eventually, though, After many tense hours, I managed to fall asleep out of pure exhaustion. I never woke up until morning time because, apparently, Enda fell asleep on his shift, and we were all asleep by that point. We were happy the sun was up, so we packed our stuff and headed back to the truck. It was a long ride home, and during the drive, Enda was going through his camera, looking at the shots that he got over the course of the 2 days there. The last 3 pictures, however, were not pictures that he took. There were 2 pictures taken of our campsite while it was still dark out. The 3rd picture was taken inside of our tent with all 3 of us asleep. Nothing was missing or stolen, strangely enough, and none of us were attacked in any way. Yet it remains the most up thing that has ever happened to any of us. Some random creep out in the woods stalking our tent and waiting for the right moment to enter our campsite, go through our stuff, sneak into our tent, and take a picture of all 3 of us, probably just to freak us out. And whoever it was, they accomplished their goal for sure. This happened to me last summer when I was 23. I wasn't a very outgoing kid at the time. If I ever did anything social, it was because my degenerate friends had somehow dragged me out of the house. This was one of those times, well, it was supposed to be. My friend Ralph invited me to a house party at like 8 p.m. It was pretty spontaneous, but I had nothing going on, so I reluctantly agreed to go with him. I knew he was going to give me crap if I refused. I can't even lie, though, the idea of a party, even with strangers, sounded more appealing than being alone. Ralph was a few towns over from me, so it made more sense for us to drive separately instead of going together. He gave me the address, and I was on my way. The literal second I pulled onto the street, Ralph bailed at the last minute. Rightfully so, I was super frustrated. How could he bail on me like this? There I was, feeling like a complete idiot outside a stranger's house. Annoyed but determined not to waste the night, I decided to go in. I drove all the way here, I thought. Might as well go inside. I walked up the front steps and knocked on the door. The host, Crispin, greeted me warmly. He was instantly likable, charismatic, and friendly without being a douchebag. He introduced me around, and things were actually less awkward than I had anticipated. People were really friendly to me despite not knowing who I was. There were even a few girls I had my eyes on. I decided to enjoy the party and hit the booze hard. It was getting pretty late, but the party was still raging. Admittedly, I might have overdone it with the drinking. At one point, I was so nauseous and dizzy that I needed a break. It must have been close to 3 a.m. at that point. I went upstairs to look for a bathroom, but they were all occupied. The house was deceptively big. Granted, it was probably the alcohol, but I was literally getting lost stumbling through the maze of hallways up there. After making it to the top floor, I found a door leading to what seemed like an attic or storage room. Desperate for privacy, I figured it was as good a place as any to pull myself together. I groped around blindly for the light switch, but there was none. This was definitely an attic or something, as there was also dust everywhere. There was a window in the far corner, which I opened, allowing the cool night breeze to wash over me. There was a solid minute there where I was seriously considering throwing up onto the roof. The breeze somewhat cured my nausea, though, so I just kept my head hung out of the window. It was dark outside, and the quiet was a refreshing contrast to the boisterous chaos downstairs. Sometimes all you need to restore your state of mind is a gentle breeze and some peace and quiet. Just as I was about to close the window and head back, I heard a faint noise, footsteps on the roof shingles. That didn't make any sense, though. Was I going crazy? Curious, I climbed out onto the roof. In all honesty, there was probably a 0% chance I would have done that if I had been sober. I slowly stood up and looked around. In the moonlight, I saw something terrifying. There were two masked figures with bags emerging from another window. It dawned on me, Crispin's house was being robbed. I started panicking. Should I shout? Confront them? Then a more pressing question hit me. What if they were armed? In my clumsy state of disbelief, I slipped and scuffed one of the shingles pretty loudly. One of the burglars heard it and jolted his head in my direction. Our eyes briefly met, and I froze. He nudged his partner, and the two of them quickly started making their way across the roof. Adrenaline surged through me. I couldn't let them get away. Crispin had been so welcoming, and I felt a surge of loyalty. I decided to act. I quietly followed the burglars across the roof, keeping a safe distance. They headed towards a sloping part of the roof for an easier escape. As they climbed down, I pulled out my phone to dial 911 but fumbled in my drunken state, dropping it. The phone clattered loudly, and the burglar turned sharply. "Who's there?" one of them hissed. Heart pounding, I ducked and scanned my surroundings, spotting a loose roof shingle. Without thinking, I grabbed it and hurled it towards them. It missed, but the noise startled them, causing one to lose his footing. He tumbled down the roof, crashing into the gutter before falling to the ground. The other burglar, now panicked, leaped to a neighboring tree and scrambled down. I rushed to the edge of the roof and saw the fallen burglar groaning on the ground. I needed to alert everyone. As I turned to head back, I heard sirens. Someone else must have called the cops. I stumbled back into the attic room and made my way downstairs, trying to appear calm. The party was still in full swing, oblivious to the drama outside. I found Crispin laughing and chatting with guests. "Crispin, you need to call the police. There's been a robbery." "I saw the burglar on the roof," I said. Crispin's face turned from amusement to shock. "Are you serious?" he said as he hurried to make the call. I explained what happened. The party mood shifted from celebration to concern. Apparently, one of Crispin's neighbors had coincidentally already called the police to file a noise complaint, which was an incredibly ironic turn of good fortune. When they arrived, I recounted my story, leading them to the injured burglar. The man was arrested, but his partner had fled. The party ended abruptly. People started scattering, and the lights got flipped on. I tried my best to act sober, but even after all that happened, I was still stumbling a bit. Crispin thanked me profusely, still in disbelief. As for me, I was just glad I could help despite the bizarre and terrifying circumstances. Looking back, I still can't really explain why the burglars would have chosen a house having a party to rob, but maybe they had prior knowledge of the house and knew no one would be upstairs. I figured that would be the end of the story, but fast forward a few months, and I've got quite the update. I was playing video games at Ralph's house one night when he got a call from Crispin, who invited us over for a few beers. Up until that point, I hadn't actually realized the two of them were that close. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up to Crispin's house was that the front door and every window in sight were completely different. Was I not remembering his house right? I could have sworn the windows and the front door had been white, but they were all gray and much more heavy-duty looking. Crispin waved us in, and we went down to his basement. We cracked a few beers and started playing a game of pool. To my surprise, he actually recognized me from the party and thanked me again for my trouble. What he told us was actually crazy, though. Apparently, The burglar the police caught that night refused to snitch on his partner and was currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. The police hadn't been able to get any leads into catching the other guy, though. Crispin told us that not even a week after the incident, his family started receiving threatening letters from an unknown sender, some of which included pictures of Crispin and his family members. Obviously, they reported these occurrences, but the police had no real leads. A month after that, Crispin's mom noticed a suspicious vehicle circling the house at around 1 a.m., and a few days later, Crispin's dad claimed that things in their backyard had been gone through and moved around. In response, Crispin's dad increased their home security and even went as far as to replace and reinforce all their doors and windows. I was shocked. This was still an ongoing issue for Crispin, and I had no idea how serious a situation like this could get. Summer's fast approaching, and I'm sure I'll have another update when I see Crispin again. When I was 18, my friend Dash, who was a big goofball, came over to chill in our basement as he often would during the summer. I remember he had a Coke bottle in his hand, and I was eating Wendy's when he said we should check out that creepy little cemetery across town. It was the most random idea ever, and I even told him that. Still, we had no school the next day, and I knew exactly which cemetery he was talking about. I don't know if one should even call it a regular cemetery. It's just a small plot of land with maybe 100 tombstones at most. The tombstones were very archaic looking, and any time we'd pass, there would be no signs of anyone having come to visit within the last decade. The site probably dated back centuries and had this super creepy vibe to it because it was closed off by a Gothic metal fence and surrounded by woods on two sides, the road on one, and some old abandoned building on the other. Everything about it just gave scary vibes. It took a little persuading, but Dash managed to get me to want to check it out too. Ironically, it was a very cloudy, reddish kind of day, conveniently adding to the mood. Dash pulled up his Honda to the side of the road. I told him to pull up more so it wasn't obvious. This was a low-traffic road, so it would look kind of suspicious. He pulled up a few hundred feet down the road, and we got out and cut through the woods so that any potential passing traffic wouldn't see us entering the little cemetery. Hopping the fence in the woods was easy. It was maybe a 3 or 4 foot fence. Dash kind of took the lead on this since it was mainly his venture. He led us through the eerie little plot of land, and we looked at the archaic tombstones. They all seemed to be from the 19th century. The writing on some of them was illegible at that point. I know it sounds super dumb and cliché, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched constantly. I started looking around the surrounding woods. I told Dash how creepy this was. "I know," he replied. Still with the feeling of being watched, I looked at the abandoned building next to the cemetery, at one of the windows. For a brief moment, I knew I saw someone standing at the window, even through the fog, smudge, and dirt on the glass. But they casually either ducked or walked away from the window. I told Dash we were being watched by someone in that building, and he turned to look at it as well. Then he went to look for the entrance to it. I told him, "Don't." I said we should just leave before we get in trouble. I stayed still by the tombstone he was looking at while he walked around a building, and then he found a way in. He called me over, but I stayed put. I heard some loud kind of crack, so I looked in that direction, and there was this older man, probably around 55. Gray hair, had on a black raincoat, I believe he was wearing jeans, and he had a mustache, but that's all I really got of him. Then he opened his mouth and screamed. Not just yelled, he screamed, "Get out." He screamed it so loud I thought I saw birds fly away from being startled. Just like that, I started to feel lightheaded, and suddenly everything went dark. The next thing I remember was waking up to being dragged in the woods. I freaked out, thinking I was being kidnapped, but when I turned and got up, I saw it was just Dash. Dash was freaking out about something. He told me to follow him and run back to the car, so I didn't ask questions. As we ran through the woods, I heard something close behind me, and when I turned, I realized we were being followed by someone. So I ran even faster. We got to his Honda, and he basically put it in drive before the car even had a chance to fully start. When Dash was inside that abandoned building, he found a sigil of Baphomet painted on the wood floor, which is basically the sign of Satan. Around it were a bunch of freaky dolls with buttons for eyes. He didn't get to see anything else in the building because he heard the old man scream at me outside. He came running to find me passed out on the floor, and he saw the old man slowly walking over to me. He started to drag me away from the old man and into the woods. He actually literally picked me up and threw me over the fence to get me out. I quickly came back to consciousness, and that's when we ran. I had only fainted one time in my life, and it was at that moment. I don't know why I fainted, but it happening at a graveyard with some kind of satanic ritual building right next to it makes it that much stranger.